I stood in my childhood kitchen pregnancy test in trembling hands as my mother's face twisted into something unrecognizable. "You can't be pregnant before Amanda," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom I'd never heard directed at me. "She's the one who deserves this blessing first, not you." The golden child versus the forgotten daughter dynamic I'd lived with my entire life was about to explode in ways I never imagined. What my mother would do next would shatter our family forever and expose secrets that would change everything. The silence that followed my mother's outburst felt like stepping into a frozen wasteland. Patricia Williams, my 53-year-old mother, stood there in her perfectly pressed beige blazer, her manicured hands clenched into fists. Her real estate empire had made her the most successful businesswoman in our small Georgia town, but right now she looked like a woman whose carefully constructed world was crumbling. "Mom, I don't understand," I whispered, still clutching the pregnancy test. "This is good news. Jake and I have been married for 2 years. We planned this baby." Her laugh was sharp and bitter. "Planned? You think you can just decide when to have children without considering how it affects the rest of the family?" Amanda, my 25-year-old sister, sat at the kitchen island looking confused. She'd come over to discuss flower arrangements for her engagement party next month. Her golden blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, and she wore the kind of expensive sundress that showcased why she'd been homecoming queen and why Dr. Marcus Thompson, the most eligible bachelor in town, had proposed to her 6 months ago. "I don't see what the problem is," Amanda said quietly. "Bernardine being pregnant doesn't affect my wedding plans." Patricia whirled around to face her favorite daughter. "Of course, it affects everything you and Marcus have been talking about starting a family, right after the honeymoon. You have your marketing degree, a proper timeline, financial stability. You've done everything the right way." She turned back to me, her green eyes blazing with an anger that made my stomach clench. "While you rushed into marriage with a public school teacher who can barely afford the mortgage on that tiny house. Now you're having a baby first, stealing Amanda's moment, disrupting the natural order of things." "The natural order?" I felt my voice rising. "Amanda is 3 years younger than me. There's no rule that says she has to have children first." "There should be," Patricia snapped. "She's the one who's ready. She has a plan. You're just flying by the seat of your pants like always." This wasn't the first time I'd heard this refrain. Growing up, Amanda had been the star of every family gathering. Her report cards were displayed on the refrigerator while mine were filed away in a drawer. Her dance recitals, cheerleading competitions, and debate team victories were attended by both parents with cameras and proud smiles. My nursing school graduation was squeezed between Patricia's real estate appointments. When Amanda started dating Marcus during her senior year of college, Patricia had immediately begun planning their future. She'd already picked out china patterns and discussed grandchildren's names. The fact that I'd married Jake 6 months before Amanda's engagement had been a minor irritation, but this pregnancy news was apparently the final straw. "You need to think about what's best for this family." Patricia continued, her voice taking on the persuasive tone she used with difficult clients. "Amanda has been looking forward to being the first to give me grandchildren. She and Marcus have everything set up perfectly. They've been discussing trying to conceive right after the honeymoon." "And that's wonderful for them," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But Jake and I are also ready to start our family. We have steady jobs, health insurance, and we love each other. Isn't that enough?" Patricia's expression hardened. Love doesn't pay for college tuition or braces or all the things children need. Marcus is a dentist with his own practice. He can provide properly for a family. Jake is a great teacher who loves his students. I defended my husband. We might not have as much money as Marcus, but we'll make it work. "Will you?" Patricia challenged. "When you're trying to afford daycare on a teacher's salary, when you realize how much babies actually cost, you haven't thought this through, Bernardine. You never think anything through." Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Mom, maybe you're being a little harsh." I'm being realistic, Patricia shot back, and I'm thinking about what's best for everyone involved, including that baby you're carrying. The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. My own mother was suggesting I wasn't capable of caring for my child. The woman who had raised me was now questioning my fitness as a mother before I'd even had a chance to prove myself. I want you to think carefully about the timing of this announcement, Patricia said, her voice becoming dangerously calm. Amanda's engagement party is next week. The wedding is in 3 months. She and Marcus are planning to start trying for children immediately after their honeymoon. It would be unfortunate if your news overshadowed their special moments. I stared at her in disbelief. You want me to hide my pregnancy? I want you to consider your family's feelings. Amanda has been dreaming of this time in her life since she was a little girl. Don't you think she deserves to enjoy her engagement and early marriage without being upstaged? I'm not trying to upstage anyone, I protested. I'm just trying to share happy news with my family. Then share it later, Patricia said firmly, after Amanda's honeymoon, after she's had time to settle into married life and start her own family. That would be the considerate thing to do. Amanda looked back and forth between us, clearly torn. She'd always been caught in the middle of Patricia's favoritism, though she'd never fully recognized it. To her credit, she'd never demanded special treatment, but she'd certainly received it. Mom, I don't need Bernardine to hide her pregnancy for me, Amanda said slowly. I'm happy for her and Jake. But Patricia wasn't listening. Her mind was already working, calculating angles and strategies like she did with her most challenging real estate deals. 2 weeks, she said to me. Give Amanda 2 weeks to enjoy her engagement party and the early wedding preparations. Then you can make your announcement. That's not too much to ask, is it? The request sounded reasonable on the surface, but something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. There was a threat hidden beneath the polite words, a suggestion that refusing would have consequences I wouldn't like. And if I don't agree? I asked. Patricia's smile was cold. Then I suppose we'll see how important family loyalty really is to you, and how important it is to Jake when he realizes what kind of family he's married into. The implicit threat hung in the air like smoke. Patricia had ways of making life difficult for people who crossed her. Her real estate connections gave her influence throughout the town, and she wasn't above using it when she felt wronged. I looked at Amanda, hoping for support, but she was staring down at her hands, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. She'd never been good at standing up to our mother, and I couldn't blame her. Patricia's approval was intoxicating when you had it, and devastating when you lost it. Fine, I heard myself say. 2 weeks. But after that, I'm telling everyone. Patricia's smile brightened immediately. Wonderful. That's very mature of you, Bernardine. I knew you'd see reason. As I left my childhood home that afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake. The pregnancy test was still in my purse, and what should have been one of the happiest days of my life had turned into something dark and complicated. Jake was waiting for me when I got home, his brown eyes bright with excitement. So how did your mom take the news? I looked at my husband of 2 years, this kind, patient man who taught 4th grade and coached Little League on weekends, and I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. How could I explain that my own mother saw our pregnancy as a problem to be managed rather than a blessing to be celebrated? She was surprised, I said, which was technically true. She wants us to wait a couple of weeks before telling everyone else. You know, let the news sink in. Jake's face fell slightly. Really, I was hoping we could call my parents tonight. They're going to be so excited to be grandparents. The guilt twisted in my stomach. Jake's parents, both retired teachers living in Florida, would indeed be thrilled. They'd been dropping hints about grandchildren since our wedding day, always with warm smiles and gentle humor. They were everything. Patricia wasn't supportive, loving, and genuinely excited about our future together. Maybe we could wait just a little bit, I suggested weakly. Let it be our secret for now. Jake wrapped his arms around me, and I breathed in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the faint chalk dust that always seemed to cling to his clothes. "Whatever you want," he said softly. "We've got 9 months ahead of us to share the news." If only I'd known that those 2 weeks of silence would be the beginning of a nightmare that would nearly destroy everything I held dear. The weight of keeping the pregnancy secret felt heavier with each passing day. I'd wake up every morning with a rush of joy, remembering the tiny life growing inside me, only to have that joy crushed by the memory of Patricia's ultimatum. 2 weeks felt like an eternity when you were carrying the most important news of your life and couldn't share it with anyone. The morning sickness hit during the second week, right as Amanda's engagement party preparations reached their peak. I found myself hunched over the toilet at 6 in the morning trying to vomit quietly so Jake wouldn't hear from the shower. When he asked if I was feeling okay, I blamed it on stress from work at the hospital. "Maybe you should take a sick day," he suggested, running his hand through his dark hair as he adjusted his tie. "You've been working a lot of extra shifts lately." I had been picking up extra shifts partly to save money for the baby and partly to avoid family gatherings where I'd have to pretend everything was normal. Patricia had called 3 times that week to discuss party details, each conversation feeling like a performance where I had to hide my growing resentment. "I can't," I told Jake. "We're short-staffed in the emergency department and Sarah is out with her daughter's flu." What I couldn't tell him was that work was the only place where I felt like myself anymore. At the hospital, I was nurse practitioner Bernardine Matthews, a competent professional who helped people in crisis. At home, I felt like I was drowning in secrets and family politics. The engagement party was being held at Patricia's house, a sprawling colonial with perfectly manicured gardens that had been featured in the local lifestyle magazine. Patricia had hired a catering company from Atlanta and transformed her backyard into something from a fairy tale, complete with string lights and roses from her prize-winning garden. I spent an hour getting ready, trying to find something that wouldn't emphasize my still flat stomach while fighting waves of nausea. Jake looked handsome in his navy suit, the one he'd bought for our own wedding. He'd been excited about the party all week, looking forward to celebrating with Amanda and Marcus and seeing extended family members that we rarely encountered. "You look beautiful," he said as I applied lipstick with shaking hands. "That blue dress is perfect on you." The dress was actually loose enough to hide any eventual pregnancy changes, which had been my primary consideration. The fact that it was also flattering was purely accidental. When we arrived at Patricia's house, the party was already in full swing. Amanda looked radiant in a cream-colored cocktail dress that highlighted her blonde hair and tanned skin. Marcus stood beside her, tall and confident in his expensive suit, greeting guests with the kind of easy charm that had made him popular since high school. Patricia was in her element, playing the perfect hostess while making sure everyone knew how successful and accomplished her future son-in-law was. She guided guests around the garden, pointing out the elaborate flower arrangements and making sure they understood that no expense had been spared for her daughter's celebration. "Bernardine, there you are," Patricia called out when she spotted me. She was wearing a lavender cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Come meet Marcus's parents. They drove down from Virginia for the party." Dr. and Mrs. Thompson were exactly what I'd expected: elegant, well-educated, and obviously wealthy. Mrs. Thompson's jewelry alone probably cost more than Jake's annual salary. They greeted me politely, but with the kind of reserved warmth that suggested they were still assessing whether I was worthy of their social circle. "So you're a nurse," Mrs. Thompson said, making it sound like a hobby rather than a profession. "How meaningful." "Nurse practitioner," I corrected gently. "I work in the emergency department at Regional Medical Center." "How stressful that must be," Dr. Thompson added. "I imagine you see all sorts of unfortunate situations." Before I could respond, Patricia smoothly redirected the conversation. Amanda has such a gift for bringing people together. She's been planning events since she was in high school. Remember her charity fundraiser for the animal shelter? She raised over $5,000. The conversation continued with Patricia, highlighting Amanda's various achievements while I stood there feeling invisible. This was nothing new, but tonight it felt particularly pointed. Every story Patricia told seemed designed to emphasize Amanda's superiority, her fitness for marriage, and future motherhood. And she'll make such a wonderful mother, Patricia continued, beaming at Amanda. She's already talking about turning the spare bedroom in Marcus's house into a nursery. They want to start a family right away. Amanda blushed prettily. Mom, we haven't even had the wedding yet. But it's good to plan ahead, Marcus said, wrapping his arm around Amanda's waist. I've always wanted children, and Amanda will be an amazing mother. The group murmured agreement, and I felt the familiar ache of being overlooked. Here I was actually pregnant with my first child, and no one knew. I was carrying the grandchild Patricia claimed to want so desperately. But instead of celebrating, I was forced to stand silently while she praised Amanda's theoretical future children. What about you and Jake? Mrs. Thompson asked suddenly. Are you planning to have children? The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, looking desperately toward Patricia. Her green eyes were sharp with warning, reminding me of our agreement. Eventually, I managed to say, we're still settling into married life. Very wise, Dr. Thompson nodded approvingly. It's important to establish financial stability before taking on the responsibility of children. The implication was clear. Unlike his son, Jake and I weren't financially ready for children. The fact that we'd been carefully saving money and had excellent health insurance didn't seem to matter. In their world, a teacher's salary wasn't sufficient for proper child rearing. As the evening progressed, I found myself retreating to quieter corners of the party, unable to participate fully in conversations that kept circling back to Amanda and Marcus's bright future. Jake noticed my withdrawal and kept checking on me, his concern growing more obvious as the night went on. Are you feeling okay? He whispered during a lull in conversation. You've been quiet all evening. Just tired, I lied, forcing a smile. It's been a long week at work. But the truth was, I felt like I was suffocating. Every toast to Amanda's future, every comment about her readiness for marriage and motherhood felt like a dagger in my chest. I was the older sister, the one who'd actually achieved the milestones they were celebrating for her, but I had to pretend none of it mattered. The worst moment came when Patricia stood up to make a speech. She tapped her champagne glass with a silver spoon, calling for attention from the 50 or so guests scattered around the garden. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate Amanda and Marcus. She began, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. As many of you know, I've been blessed with 2 daughters, but tonight is Amanda's special night. She went on to talk about Amanda's accomplishments, her kindness, her readiness for marriage, and the responsibilities that came with it. She spoke about Marcus's successful dental practice and how perfectly matched they were in temperament and ambition. Some people rush into major life decisions, Patricia continued, and I felt her gaze find me in the crowd. But Amanda and Marcus have taken their time, made careful plans, and prepared themselves for every aspect of married life. They're ready for all the blessings that come with a strong foundation. The applause was enthusiastic, and I joined in mechanically, while inside I was screaming. The message was clear to anyone who knew how to read Patricia's subtle communications. Amanda was the daughter who did things right, while I was the one who rushed into decisions without proper consideration. After the speech, Amanda found me near the dessert table. She looked radiant and happy, but there was something thoughtful in her expression that made me nervous. Are you having a good time? She asked, adjusting the engagement ring that caught the light from the string lamps overhead. Of course, I said quickly. It's a beautiful party. You look amazing. Thanks. She was quiet for a moment, then glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Can I tell you something? Marcus and I have actually been trying to have a baby for the past 8 months. My champagne glass nearly slipped from my hands. What? We started trying right after we got engaged, she said quietly. I know it seems fast, but we're both ready, and Marcus is 32. He doesn't want to wait. I managed to ask, though my mouth felt dry. Amanda's smile faltered slightly. Nothing yet. My doctor says it can take time, that we shouldn't worry until it's been a full year. But Marcus is starting to get concerned. He's been talking about fertility testing. The irony was overwhelming. Here I was pregnant and forced to hide it while Amanda was struggling with the very thing Patricia was so sure would happen easily. The unfairness of it all made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I'm sure everything is fine, I said weakly. These things happen when they're supposed to happen. I hope so, Amanda said, but I could hear the worry in her voice. I've always assumed I'd get pregnant easily. Mom did. You probably will too when the time comes. If she only knew that the time had already come, that the pregnancy she was hoping for was already happening to someone else. But I couldn't tell her, not when Patricia's ultimatum hung over everything like a storm cloud. Don't stress about it, I advised, though the words felt hollow. Stress can actually make it harder to conceive. Amanda nodded, but I could see she was already thinking ahead to doctor's appointments and fertility discussions. The pressure Patricia had put on both of us was affecting Amanda too, just in a different way. She felt obligated to produce grandchildren quickly, while I felt obligated to delay announcing the grandchild I was already carrying. As Jake and I drove home that night, I stared out the window at the familiar streets of our small town. Everything looked normal under the streetlights, but nothing felt right anymore. The secret I was carrying was poisoning everything, making me feel disconnected from my own life. Good party, Jake said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. Amanda and Marcus seem really happy. I agreed, unable to trust my voice. Your mom looked pleased with how everything went. She really pulled out all the stops. She had indeed. Patricia had orchestrated a perfect evening designed to showcase Amanda's bright future while subtly undermining mine. The worst part was that it had worked. Everyone left that party convinced that Amanda was the daughter with the promising future, while I remained invisible and overlooked. When we got home, I went straight to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub, finally allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. My own mother had manipulated me into hiding the most important news of my life, and I had let her do it. I had stood there silently while she praised Amanda's theoretical children and questioned my readiness for the responsibilities I was already embracing. The pregnancy test was still hidden in my drawer, and I pulled it out to stare at the 2 pink lines that had started this whole mess. In 1 week, I would be free to share this news with the world. But I was beginning to suspect that Patricia's campaign against my pregnancy was just getting started. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was getting ready for my shift at the hospital. Jake had already left for school, and I was fighting another wave of morning sickness when my phone rang. Patricia's name appeared on the screen, which wasn't unusual, but her tone when I answered was different somehow. Brighter, more excited than I'd heard her sound in months. Bernardine, honey, I have wonderful news, she said, and I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. Guess who I ran into at the country club yesterday? I have no idea, I said, though something in her voice made my stomach clench with unease. Derek Chamberlain, she announced triumphantly. Can you believe it? He's back in town after all these years. The name hit me like a slap. Derek had been my boyfriend for 3 years during college and for 2 years after graduation. We'd been serious talking about marriage and future plans until I realized that we wanted completely different things from life. He'd been focused on climbing the corporate ladder in pharmaceutical sales, while I'd wanted to build a career helping people in healthcare. Our breakup had been amicable but final, and I hadn't thought about him in years. That's nice, I said carefully, wondering why Patricia was calling to tell me this. He looks wonderful, she continued enthusiastically. Very successful. He's got his own territory now covering 3 states. He was driving this gorgeous Mercedes and wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people make in a month. I sat down heavily on the bed, recognizing the tone in Patricia's voice. It was the same one she used when she talked about Marcus's dental practice or Amanda's marketing degree. She was setting up for something, and I had a terrible feeling I knew what it was. He asked about you, Patricia said, and there it was. He seemed genuinely interested in how you were doing. I told him you'd married Jake, of course, but he said he'd love to catch up sometime. Mom, why are you telling me this? Because he's single again, she said, as if that explained everything. His engagement to that girl from Atlanta fell through last year. Something about her not being ready for the kind of lifestyle he could provide. The pieces were falling into place now, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. I'm married, Mom. Happily married. Of course you are, dear, Patricia said quickly. I just thought it might be nice to reconnect with old friends. Derek was always such a good influence on you. He pushed you to think bigger, to consider your future more carefully. That wasn't how I remembered it. Derek had pushed me to consider his vision of my future, which involved being the perfect corporate wife who would host dinner parties and look good at company functions. When I'd chosen nursing school over moving to Atlanta with him, he'd accused me of lacking ambition and settling for mediocrity. I don't think Jake would be comfortable with me meeting up with an ex-boyfriend, I said firmly. Oh, I'm sure Jake is secure enough in your marriage not to worry about old friendships, Patricia said smoothly. Besides, I was thinking more of a family dinner. Very casual, very innocent. Just a chance for Derek to meet Jake and see how well you've done for yourself. The suggestion was so transparently manipulative that I almost laughed. Patricia wanted Derek to meet Jake so they could be compared side by side with Derek's obvious financial success, highlighting Jake's modest teacher's salary. It was exactly the kind of psychological warfare Patricia excelled at. I don't think that's a good idea, I said. Why not? Patricia's tone sharpened slightly. Are you ashamed of Jake? Of course not. I'm proud of my husband. I just don't see the point in rehashing old relationships when I'm perfectly happy with my current life. Sometimes it's good to be reminded of roads not taken, Patricia said cryptically. It helps us appreciate what we have, or recognize what we might have missed. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Patricia was already working on some kind of plan involving Derek, and my cooperation wasn't really optional. I'd learned that lesson at Amanda's engagement party, where refusing Patricia's requests led to consequences that were worse than compliance. Oh, fine, I said reluctantly. One dinner, but I'm choosing the restaurant, and Jake comes with me. Actually, I was thinking Sunday dinner at my house would be more appropriate, Patricia countered. More intimate, a chance for real conversation. Of course she was. Sunday dinners at Patricia's house were formal affairs where she controlled every detail from the seating arrangement to the conversation topics. It would give her maximum opportunity to orchestrate whatever comparisons she had in mind. And I've already invited Amanda and Marcus, she continued. It'll be a lovely family gathering. The inclusion of Amanda and Marcus clinched it. Patricia wanted witnesses for whatever she was planning. People who would see Derek's success contrasted with Jake's more modest circumstances. Amanda and Marcus would unconsciously validate Patricia's point about choosing the right kind of partner. That evening, I told Jake about the dinner invitation, trying to present it as casually as possible. We were in our small kitchen, and he was grading papers while I pretended to review patient charts. The domestic scene felt precious and fragile, like something that could be shattered by the wrong word. Derek Chamberlain, Jake mused, looking up from a stack of math tests. The pharmaceutical guy you dated before me? That's him, I said, not meeting his eyes. Mom ran into him somewhere and invited him to Sunday dinner. I think she's just being polite. Jake's expression was thoughtful, but not concerned. That was one of the things I loved most about my husband, his fundamental security in himself and our relationship. He didn't see other men as threats because he trusted what we had together. Should be interesting, he said mildly. I'd like to meet this guy who was smart enough to date you, but dumb enough to let you go. His easy confidence made me feel even worse about Patricia's manipulation. Jake trusted me completely, and here I was, leading him into a situation designed to undermine that trust and make him question his own worth. Sunday arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October. I spent an hour choosing my outfit, finally settling on a simple black dress that was professional but not too formal. Jake wore khakis and a button-down shirt, looking handsome and relaxed. He'd stopped to pick up flowers for Patricia, a thoughtful gesture that was typical of his considerate nature. Derek was already at Patricia's house when we arrived, and I had to admit that the years had been kind to him. He was still tall and lean. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his navy suit was clearly expensive. He looked like an advertisement for success, which was undoubtedly exactly the impression Patricia wanted to create. "Bernardine," he said warmly, standing to greet me, "you look amazing. Marriage obviously agrees with you." His smile was genuine, and for a moment I remembered why I'd fallen for him in college. Derek could be charming when he wanted to be, and he'd apparently decided to deploy that charm at full strength tonight. "Thank you," I said politely. "Derek, this is my husband Jake." The two men shook hands, and I watched Derek's assessment of Jake play out across his features. He was clearly cataloging details: Jake's off-the-rack clothes, his teacher's calloused hands, the absence of expensive accessories. Derek's smile remained warm, but I caught a flicker of something that might have been pity. Great to meet you, Jake," Derek said smoothly. "Bernardine mentioned you're a teacher. What grade?" "Fourth," Jake replied easily. "Best age to work with. They're still excited about learning, but old enough to have real conversations." "That must be rewarding," Derek said, though his tone suggested he couldn't imagine finding such work fulfilling. "I deal with doctors mostly, trying to convince them to prescribe the latest medications for their patients. Very different kind of education." Patricia appeared with drinks beaming as she orchestrated the introductions. She'd set the dining room table with her best china, the kind she usually reserved for Christmas or other major holidays. Fresh flowers from her garden created an elegant centerpiece, and candles provided soft lighting that made everything look like a magazine spread. "Derek was just telling me about his territory," Patricia said as we moved toward the dining room. "He covers Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina now. Isn't that impressive?" "Sounds like a lot of driving," Jake commented. "It is, but the company provides the car," Derek said, gesturing toward the window where his silver Mercedes was visible in the driveway. "And the flexibility is nice. I can work from anywhere as long as I'm hitting my targets." Amanda and Marcus arrived just as Patricia was serving the first course, a butternut squash soup that smelled amazing, and probably took hours to prepare. Amanda looked beautiful in an emerald green dress that brought out her eyes, and Marcus wore the kind of casual, expensive clothes that only looked effortless if you could afford to shop at the right stores. The conversation flowed easily at first, covering safe topics like the weather and local news, but I could feel Patricia steering things gradually toward more personal territory the way she did when she was building toward a particular point in her real estate presentations. "Derek, you must travel to some fascinating places for work," she said, refilling his wine glass. "Much more exciting than staying in one town your whole life." "I do get around," Derek agreed. "Last month, I was in Charleston for a medical conference. Beautiful city, the kind of place you'd want to live if you could afford waterfront property." Oh, Marcus and I are thinking about Charleston for our honeymoon," Amanda said brightly. "We want somewhere romantic, but not too far to travel." "Perfect choice," Derek said. "There are some incredible restaurants there. I took a client to this place called the Ocean House last time I was there. $150 a person, but worth every penny." Jake's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of the price, which was probably more than we spent on groceries in a week. Patricia caught the reaction and smiled, clearly pleased with how the evening was progressing. "It must be nice to be able to enjoy the finer things," she said, looking meaningfully at Derek. "Success does have its privileges." "I've been lucky," Derek said modestly, though his tone suggested luck had very little to do with it. "The pharmaceutical industry has been good to me. Of course, it requires a certain lifestyle, entertaining clients, maintaining appearances, staying current with medical trends. Not everyone could handle the pressure." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Derek's work was important and demanding, requiring sophistication and financial resources. Jake's work, by contrast, was simple and modestly compensated, suitable for someone with limited ambitions. "Teaching has its own pressures," Jake said mildly. 25 nine-year-olds can be pretty demanding." "I'm sure," Derek said, with the kind of indulgent smile adults give to children who say something cute but naive. "Though I imagine the summers off must be nice." It was a common misconception that always irritated Jake, the idea that teachers had summers off rather than using that time for curriculum development, continuing education, and second jobs to supplement their income. But Jake just smiled and changed the subject, refusing to take the bait. Patricia served the main course, a perfectly prepared beef tenderloin with roasted vegetables that probably cost more than Jake and I would normally spend on a week's worth of dinners. She made sure to mention that the meat came from a specialty butcher in Atlanta, another subtle reminder of the kind of lifestyle Derek's income could support. "This is incredible, Mrs. Williams," Derek said, cutting into his steak. "You always did know how to entertain." "Thank you, dear," Patricia beamed. "I do think it's important to maintain standards even for casual family dinners. Some things shouldn't be compromised on." Again, the message was clear. Patricia had standards that required a certain level of financial investment. Jake and I, with our modest means, were presumably unable to maintain those standards. As the evening progressed, I found myself growing more and more uncomfortable with the dynamic Patricia was creating. She asked Derek about his career goals, his travel experiences, his thoughts on various luxury goods and services. She asked Jake about his students and his coaching responsibilities, framing his work as a hobby rather than a profession. The worst moment came during dessert, when Patricia brought out an elaborate chocolate cake she'd clearly purchased from an expensive bakery. As she served it, she mentioned that Derek had always appreciated fine desserts, remembering specific restaurants where they'd shared meals during our college years. "Do you remember that place in Savannah?" she asked Derek. "The one with the chocolate souffle that you took Bernardine to for her birthday?" Derek's smile was nostalgic. "La Petite Maison. That was a special night. I'd been planning that dinner for months, making sure everything was perfect." The memory was accurate, but Patricia's version emphasized the planning and expense rather than the emotional significance. That birthday dinner had been wonderful, not because of the restaurant's prestige, but because Derek had listened when I mentioned loving chocolate and had wanted to make the evening special for me. "Jake, where did you take Bernardine for her last birthday?" Patricia asked with apparent innocence. Jake looked slightly embarrassed. "We went to that new pizza place downtown, then caught a movie. Nothing fancy, but Bernardine said she just wanted to spend time together." "How sweet," Patricia said, though her tone suggested she found it disappointingly simple. What she didn't mention was that I'd specifically requested that birthday plan. After a long week at the hospital, I'd wanted nothing more than casual time with my husband, eating good food and watching something mindless. It had been perfect for what I needed. But in Patricia's telling, it sounded like Jake couldn't afford anything better. By the time dinner ended, I felt like I'd been through a battle. Derek shook hands with Jake again, expressing how nice it had been to meet him. His politeness was perfect, but there was a subtle condescension in his manner that made my skin crawl. "We should keep in touch," Derek said to me as we prepared to leave. "It's good to reconnect with old friends." That would be lovely, Patricia answered before I could respond. Derek, you should come to Amanda's wedding. It's going to be such a beautiful celebration. The invitation was extended without consulting Amanda, who looked surprised but too polite to object. Derek accepted graciously, and suddenly my sister's wedding had been turned into another opportunity for Patricia to showcase the road I hadn't taken. During the drive home, Jake was quiet, and I could tell he was processing the evening. Finally, he spoke up. Derek seems like a nice enough guy, he said carefully. Very different from what I expected. Different how? More polished, I guess. He's obviously done well for himself. The doubt in Jake's voice was subtle but unmistakable. Patricia's plan was already working, planting seeds of insecurity about his ability to provide for me the way Derek could have. The comparison had been drawn, and Jake had clearly found himself wanting. I don't care about any of that, I said quickly. You know that, right? The money, the car, the expensive dinners. None of it matters to me. I know, Jake said, but he didn't sound entirely convinced. It's just, sometimes I wonder if you ever think about what your life might have been like if you'd made different choices. The question broke my heart because I could hear the vulnerability behind it. My kind, loving husband was questioning his worth because my mother had orchestrated an evening designed to make him feel inadequate. Never, I said firmly, reaching over to take his hand. I've never once regretted choosing you over Derek, not for a single minute. Jake squeezed my fingers, and I felt some of the tension leave his shoulders, but I knew the damage had been done. Patricia had planted seeds of doubt that would grow in the quiet moments when Jake was feeling overwhelmed by bills or tired from dealing with difficult parents or wondering if he was enough for the woman he loved. As we pulled into our driveway, I made a decision. The 2-week deadline Patricia had given me was almost up anyway, and I was tired of letting her manipulate our lives. It was time to tell Jake about the pregnancy and put an end to the games. But before I could say anything, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Derek. Great meeting Jake tonight. Your mom gave me your number. Hope we can get coffee soon and catch up properly. The message felt like a threat, though I couldn't explain exactly why. Derek, reaching out directly rather than going through Patricia, suggested a level of coordination that made me uneasy. Whatever my mother had planned for our family was just getting started, and I had a terrible feeling that Sunday's dinner had been only the opening move in a much larger game. Derek's text messages started the next morning and continued throughout the week with a frequency that felt deliberate rather than casual. They began innocuously, enough sharing memories from college and asking general questions about my life, but gradually they became more personal, more probing, and more concerning. Saw a new Italian restaurant downtown that reminded me of that place we used to love in Atlanta. Read one message. The kind of spot Jake probably can't afford, but maybe we could check it out sometime for old time's sake. The subtle dig at Jake's finances wasn't accidental. Derek was systematically reinforcing the narrative Patricia had established at dinner, positioning himself as someone who could provide experiences Jake couldn't. When I didn't respond to that message, he tried a different approach. Been thinking about our conversation at your mom's. Jake seems like a good guy, but teaching is such a tough profession these days. Budget cuts, low pay, difficult parents. Must be stressful for both of you. Each message was carefully crafted to sound concerned while actually undermining my marriage. Derek was presenting himself as someone who understood my struggles while implying that Jake was the source of those struggles. It was psychological manipulation of the highest order, and I recognized it for what it was. The problem was that the constant drip of negativity was starting to affect me, despite my awareness of the tactics being used. Patricia, meanwhile, had ramped up her own campaign. She called every other day with some new story about Derek's success, or some subtle criticism of Jake's limitations. She mentioned that Derek had been promoted again and was now earning a 6-figure salary. She wondered aloud whether Jake's teaching position was secure given the school board's budget discussions. She suggested that perhaps I was settling for less than I deserved. "I just want you to be happy, sweetheart," she said during one particularly pointed phone call. "But sometimes love isn't enough if there's no foundation to build on." The week was made worse by Amanda's increasing anxiety about her fertility struggles. She'd started calling me regularly to discuss her concerns, sharing details about ovulation tracking and prenatal vitamins, and the pressure she was feeling from Marcus to see a specialist. Each conversation was a painful reminder that I was pregnant, while she desperately wanted to be. "The doctor says everything looks normal," Amanda told me during a tearful phone call on Thursday, "but it's been 9 months now and I'm starting to think something's wrong with me." "These things take time," I said gently, though the words felt hollow. "Stress can actually make it harder to conceive, so try not to worry." "Easy for you to say," Amanda snapped, then immediately apologized. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. It's just, everyone keeps telling me to relax, but how can I relax when Mom keeps asking about grandchildren and Marcus is talking about fertility treatments?" The irony was overwhelming. I was carrying the grandchild Patricia claimed to want desperately, but I couldn't say anything because of her arbitrary timeline restrictions. Meanwhile, Amanda was torturing herself over a pregnancy that hadn't happened yet, driven by pressure from the same woman who was systematically trying to destroy my marriage. Friday brought a new escalation in Patricia's campaign. She called to invite Jake and me to dinner at the country club, mentioning casually that Derek would be joining us. When I protested that we'd just seen him, she acted surprised by my reluctance. "I thought you enjoyed catching up with old friends," she said innocently. "Derek certainly seemed to enjoy meeting Jake. He's been asking about you both all week." "Mom, this is getting weird. Why are you so interested in Derek all of a sudden?" "I'm not interested in Derek specifically," Patricia said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I'm interested in your happiness, and I think it's important for married couples to socialize with successful people who can broaden their perspectives." The translation was clear. Jake needed to see more examples of successful men so he could understand how inadequate he was by comparison. Patricia was using Derek as a weapon against my marriage, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "We're not coming to dinner," I said firmly. "Jake has papers to grade and I'm exhausted from work." "That's unfortunate," Patricia said coolly. "I suppose I'll have to tell Derek you're too busy for old friends. He'll be disappointed." The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Patricia would frame my absence as rejection of Derek, specifically making me look rude and ungrateful. She was forcing me to choose between seeing Derek again and appearing antisocial to the rest of the family. In the end, I gave in partly because I was tired of fighting, and partly because I hoped that one more dinner would satisfy Patricia's strange obsession with reconnecting me with my ex-boyfriend. Jake was reluctant, but agreed to come, probably sensing that refusing would create more problems than attending. The country club dinner was even worse than I'd anticipated. Patricia had reserved a table in the main dining room where we'd be visible to half the town's social elite. Derek arrived looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Jake's monthly salary. He'd brought flowers for Patricia and complimented her dress with the kind of smooth charm that had once swept me off my feet. "Bernardine, you look lovely," he said, kissing my cheek in a gesture that felt too intimate for the setting. "And Jake, good to see you again." The evening followed the same pattern as the previous dinner, with Patricia steering conversation toward topics that highlighted Derek's success and Jake's more modest circumstances. She asked Derek about his recent business trips, his new car lease, his thoughts on various expensive restaurants and luxury destinations. She asked Jake about his students' test scores and the challenges of working within a limited school budget. But tonight, Derek was more aggressive in drawing comparisons. He mentioned that his company's health insurance covered fertility treatments should he and his future wife ever need them. He talked about the importance of financial security when starting a family and how children deserved every advantage their parents could provide. Of course, there are different definitions of success, Derek said, cutting into his filet mignon. Some people prioritize money, others prioritize fulfillment. Both have merit. The comment was directed at Jake, who had been talking about the satisfaction he found in helping struggling students improve their reading skills. Derek's tone was patronizing, suggesting that Jake's fulfillment was a consolation prize for his inability to achieve real success. I think making a difference in children's lives is pretty successful, Jake replied evenly. 20 years from now, those kids will remember teachers who believed in them. Absolutely, Derek agreed smoothly. Though, of course, your own children will need more tangible forms of support, college tuition, medical expenses, all those practical considerations. The conversation was like watching someone slowly poison a well. Derek was systematically undermining Jake's confidence while appearing to engage in reasonable discussion about family planning and financial responsibility. The worst moment came when Patricia excused herself to use the restroom, leaving the three of us alone at the table. Derek immediately leaned forward, his demeanor becoming more intimate and personal. I hope you know how lucky you are, he said to Jake, but his eyes were on me. Bernardine is an amazing woman. She deserves someone who can give her everything she wants. I think I can manage that, Jake said, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. I'm sure you think so, Derek replied, his tone suggesting gentle disagreement. But marriage is about more than love, isn't it? It's about partnership, about building a life together. Sometimes good intentions aren't enough when reality sets in. He was talking about Jake as if he weren't sitting right there addressing him directly while making it clear that he found him inadequate. The disrespect was breathtaking, but it was delivered with such polished charm that it was hard to call out without sounding defensive. Reality has been pretty good to us so far, I said firmly, reaching for Jake's hand across the table. Of course it has, Derek said, his smile never wavering. Newlywed bliss is wonderful, but wait until you start thinking about children, about providing for a family. That's when couples discover whether their foundation is strong enough to last. Patricia returned to the table at that moment, and Derek smoothly transitioned back to lighter conversation, but the damage had been done. I could see Jake processing Derek's words, comparing his teacher's salary to Derek's pharmaceutical income, wondering if love really was enough to build a stable family. During the drive home, Jake was quiet again, and this time his silence felt heavier. When we got to our house, he sat in the car for a moment before getting out, staring at our small front yard with its modest landscaping and older model cars. Do you think Derek's right, he asked suddenly, about financial foundation being important for families? The question broke my heart because I could hear how much it cost him to ask it. Jake was questioning not just his ability to provide for me, but his worth as a husband and potential father. No, I said firmly. I think Derek is an arrogant fool who measures everything by dollar signs. We have love, we have stable jobs, we have health insurance, and we have each other. That's more foundation than most people have. But what if we have children, Jake pressed. What if I can't give them everything they need? I looked at my husband, this good man who was being systematically torn down by people who should have supported him, and I made a decision. The 2 weeks Patricia had demanded were almost up anyway, and I was tired of watching her destroy my marriage from the inside out. Jake, I said softly, there's something I need to tell you. But before I could continue, my phone rang. Patricia's name appeared on the screen, and something about the timing felt ominous. I considered ignoring it, but Patricia had a way of making missed calls into major incidents. Hello, Mom. Bernardine, dear, I hope you had a lovely time at dinner. Derek certainly seemed to enjoy the evening. It was fine, I said carefully. Good. I'm calling because Derek mentioned he'd like to see you again soon. Perhaps for lunch, just the two of you. He said there are some things he'd like to discuss privately. The suggestion was so inappropriate that I almost laughed, Mom, I'm not having lunch with my ex-boyfriend. That would be completely inappropriate. Oh, I don't think Jake would mind, Patricia said breezily. He seems very secure in your marriage. Besides, Derek is practically family at this point. He's coming to Amanda's wedding, and I've been thinking about including him in more family activities. The escalation was stunning. Patricia was now trying to integrate Derek into our family, permanently giving him access to me and creating ongoing opportunities for comparison with Jake. It was psychological warfare disguised as social planning. I'm not doing this anymore, I said firmly. I'm not playing whatever game you're trying to set up. Kosish. Patricia's voice took on a hurt tone. I'm simply trying to maintain family connections and ensure that you have opportunities to broaden your social circle. I thought you'd appreciate having successful friends. I have friends, Mom, and I have a husband I love. I don't need you to arrange my social life. Of course not, Patricia said, but her tone had turned cold. I just hope you're making decisions based on what's truly best for your future. Sometimes we get so comfortable with familiar situations that we forget to consider whether they're actually serving our best interests. After I hung up, Jake was looking at me with concern. What was that about? My mother trying to run my life, I said, frustrated beyond measure. She wants me to have lunch with Derek to discuss something privately. Can you believe that? Jake's expression grew troubled. What would he want to discuss with you privately? The question contained a note of suspicion that hadn't been there before Derek's reappearance in our lives. Patricia's campaign was working, eroding the trust that had always been the foundation of our relationship. I have no idea, and I don't care, I said firmly. I'm not having lunch with him or any other private meetings. This whole situation is ridiculous. But even as I said the words, I could see doubt flickering in Jake's eyes. Derek's comments about financial foundation, Patricia's constant comparisons, and now the suggestion of private meetings were creating a perfect storm of insecurity that was threatening everything Jake and I had built together. That night, lying in bed next to my sleeping husband, I made a final decision about the pregnancy announcement. Patricia's deadline was meaningless when weighed against the damage being done to my marriage. Every day I remained silent. Tomorrow, I would tell Jake about the baby and put an end to the games once and for all. But as I drifted off to sleep, Derek's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes good intentions aren't enough when reality sets in. He was wrong about Jake's ability to provide for our family, but he was right about one thing. Reality was setting in, and it was more complicated and dangerous than I'd ever imagined. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang, and through the window I could see Derek's silver Mercedes parked in our driveway. Jake was outside raking leaves, and I watched through the glass as Derek approached him with that practiced smile I remembered so well. My hands shook as I set down the coffee pot. Patricia had obviously given Derek our address, and his showing up unannounced felt like a violation of boundaries I thought I'd made clear. I opened the front door just as Derek was extending his hand to Jake. "Hope you don't mind me dropping by," Derek said smoothly. "I was in the neighborhood showing a client some properties, and I thought I'd say hello." The lie was so casual, I almost admired his audacity. Derek lived in Atlanta and had no reason to be showing properties in our small town, but Jake, always trusting and polite, was already inviting him inside for coffee. "Bernardine just made a fresh pot," Jake said, leading Derek toward our front door. "Come on in." I forced a smile as the two men entered our modest living room. Derek's expensive suit looked out of place against our second-hand furniture and family photos, which I suspected was exactly the impression he wanted to create. He accepted coffee and settled into our worn armchair like he belonged there. "Great neighborhood," Derek commented, glancing around our small living room. "Very cozy, perfect starter home for a young couple." The word starter hung in the air like a judgment. Derek was implying that our house was temporary, a stepping stone to something better that we presumably couldn't afford yet. Jake's jaw tightened slightly, and I could see him processing the subtle criticism. "We love it here," I said firmly. "It's exactly what we wanted." "Of course," Derek agreed, though his tone suggested he found our contentment puzzling. "Though I imagine you'll want something larger eventually, especially when you start thinking about children." The comment felt like a probe testing to see if we'd reveal any family planning information. I kept my expression neutral, but Derek's presence in our living room while I was carrying a secret pregnancy felt deeply uncomfortable. "Speaking of children," Derek continued, "I was talking to your mother yesterday, Bernardine. She mentioned that Amanda and Marcus are hoping to start a family soon after the wedding. How exciting for your parents." Jake looked confused. "I thought we were all hoping Amanda would start a family soon. That's not exactly news." Derek's smile became more pointed. "Oh, but there's pressure involved, isn't there? When you're the favored child, everyone has expectations about when you'll provide grandchildren. Must be tough for Amanda, knowing how much Patricia is looking forward to being a grandmother." The manipulation was sophisticated and cruel. Derek was planting the idea that Amanda was under pressure to produce grandchildren quickly, which implied that any pregnancy announcement from Jake and me would be seen as interference with Patricia's preferred timeline. He was reinforcing the very trap Patricia had already set. "All parents look forward to grandchildren," I said carefully. True, but some are more invested in the timing than others," Derek replied. "Your mother strikes me as someone who has very specific ideas about how things should unfold. The right daughter, the right circumstances, the right financial foundation." Jake's expression grew more troubled with each word. Derek was systematically confirming every insecurity Jake had developed about his worthiness as a husband and potential father. The psychological assault was relentless and expertly delivered. "Can I get you more coffee?" I asked, desperate to change the subject. "Actually, I was hoping to talk to Bernardine alone for a few minutes," Derek said, turning to Jake with apparent reluctance. "There's something personal I'd like to discuss. Family history stuff that might bore you." The request was so inappropriate that I opened my mouth to refuse immediately, but Derek continued before I could speak, his tone becoming more urgent and concerned. "It's about Patricia, actually. Something she said about you two that concerned me. As an old friend, I thought Bernardine should know." Jake looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with the request, but uncertain about how to refuse without seeming unreasonable. Derek had framed his request as concern for our welfare, making it difficult to reject without appearing suspicious or ungrateful. "I'll just run to the hardware store," Jake said reluctantly. "I need some supplies for the gutters anyway." "Perfect," Derek said, standing to shake Jake's hand again. "This won't take long." After Jake left, Derek's entire demeanor changed. The polite mask dropped, and he moved closer to where I was standing by the kitchen counter. His smile became more intimate, more personal, as if we were resuming a relationship rather than having a conversation between old acquaintances. "Finally," he said softly. "I've been wanting to talk to you alone since that first dinner at your mother's." "Derek, whatever you think you need to say, I'm not interested in hearing it," I said firmly, moving to put the kitchen island between us. "Just hear me out," he said, raising his hand in a gesture of innocence. "I'm worried about you, Bernie. You seem different, unhappy." The use of my old nickname was deliberate and unsettling. Derek was trying to invoke intimacy from our shared past, reminding me of who I used to be when we were together. "I'm perfectly happy with it," I said, "and I'd like you to leave." "Are you, though?" Derek moved around the island, closing the distance between us again. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're settling for less than you deserve. Jake seems like a nice guy, but let's be honest about what he can offer you." "He offers me love, respect, and partnership," I said, backing toward the living room. "That's everything I want." "But what about everything you need?" Derek pressed. "Financial security, social status, the ability to provide properly for children when the time comes." The mention of children made my stomach lurch. reminding me of the secret I was carrying and the impossible position Patricia had put me in. Derek seemed to sense my reaction, his expression becoming more predatory. "Your mother told me something interesting," he said, moving closer still, "about timing and family expectations and making sure the right people have children first." My blood ran cold. Patricia had told Derek about the pregnancy timeline she demanded, about keeping my news secret until Amanda conceived. Derek knew about the pressure I was under, and he was using it as leverage. She didn't tell me specifics. Derek continued seeing my panic, but she did suggest that you might be reconsidering some of your recent decisions, that maybe you were starting to realize that love isn't always enough. "You're wrong," I said, but my voice sounded weaker than I intended. Derek reached out to touch my arm, and I jerked away from the contact. His hand caught my shoulder instead, pulling me closer as he leaned down to speak directly in my ear. "I never stopped loving you, Bernie," he whispered. "When you chose Jake, I respected that decision. But if you're having doubts, if you're realizing that you made a mistake, I'm here. I can give you everything he can't." The words were delivered with practiced sincerity, but I could hear the calculation beneath them. Derek wasn't offering love, he was offering a business proposition disguised as romance. He saw me as an acquisition that had slipped away once and might be recoverable under the right circumstances. "Get away from me," I said, pushing against his chest. But Derek didn't release me immediately. Instead, he pulled me closer, his lips moving toward mine in a kiss I absolutely didn't want. I turned my head away, struggling against his hold when I heard the front door open. "I forgot my wallet," Jake's voice called from the entryway. Derek released me instantly, stepping back and smoothing his hair as if nothing had happened. But the timing was too perfect, too convenient. As Jake appeared in the living room doorway, he saw Derek and me standing close together, my face flushed, and Derek looking slightly disheveled. "Sorry to interrupt," Jake said, his voice carefully neutral. "I just need to grab my wallet." "No interruption at all," Derek said smoothly. "Bernardine and I were just finishing our conversation. Lots of old memories to catch up on." The implication was clear and deliberate. Derek was suggesting that our conversation had been more intimate than it actually was, that old feelings had been rekindled during Jake's absence. His slightly rumpled appearance and my obvious distress created a picture that was misleading, but damaging. Jake retrieved his wallet without making eye contact with either of us. "I'll be back in an hour," he said tersely. After Jake left again, Derek's smile became triumphant. "That worked out perfectly," he said with satisfaction. What worked out perfectly? I demanded, though I was starting to understand the scope of his manipulation. "Jake seeing us together, seeing you emotional and responsive, realizing that there are still feelings between us that haven't been resolved." The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. Derek had orchestrated the entire encounter, timing his approach and Jake's interruption to create maximum doubt and suspicion. He'd used my resistance to his advances as evidence of passion rather than rejection. "There are no feelings between us," I said firmly, "and Jake will see right through whatever game you're playing." "Will he?" Derek asked. "Because from what I observed, Jake is already questioning his place in your life. He's wondering if he's enough for you, if he can compete with what I could offer. Tonight's little scene will only reinforce those doubts." Derek moved toward the door, clearly satisfied with the chaos he'd created. "Think about what I said, Bernie, about timing and making the right choices and ensuring your future is as bright as it could be." "My future is with Jake," I said. "Maybe," Derek replied, "but futures can change when people realize they've been settling for less than they deserve." After he left, I sat on my couch, trembling with rage and fear. Derek had weaponized Jake's insecurities and Patricia's manipulation, creating a situation where my husband would doubt both my faithfulness and my satisfaction with our marriage. The psychological warfare was sophisticated and devastating, designed to destroy us from within. When Jake returned from the hardware store an hour later, his demeanor was completely different. He was quiet and distant, avoiding eye contact and answering my questions with minimal responses. During dinner, the silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Jake, we need to talk about what you saw earlier," I finally said. "Do we?" he asked, not looking up from his plate, because it seemed pretty self-explanatory. "Derek tried to kiss me," I said bluntly. "I was pushing him away when you walked in. That's why I looked upset." Jake finally met my eyes, and I could see the doubt there along with the pain. "That's not what it looked like to me." "What did it look like?" "It looked like two people who were having an intimate conversation. It looked like maybe there are still feelings there that you haven't told me about." Derek's manipulation had worked perfectly. Jake had seen exactly what Derek wanted him to see, and now my husband was questioning everything about our relationship. "There are no feelings," I said desperately. "Derek is trying to cause problems between us. Can't you see that?" "I can see that your ex-boyfriend is successful and charming and obviously still interested in you," Jake said quietly. "And I can see that your mother thinks you'd be better off with him. Maybe they're right." The defeat in his voice broke my heart. Patricia and Derek's systematic assault on his confidence had worked, convincing this wonderful man that he wasn't worthy of the love we shared. "They're not right," I said firmly. "They're manipulative and cruel, and they're trying to destroy our marriage." But even as I said the words, I could see that Jake was already half convinced by their arguments. The seeds of doubt had been planted, watered with carefully orchestrated encounters, and were now beginning to bloom into something that might destroy everything we'd built together. That night, Jake slept on the couch, claiming he needed space to think. I lay alone in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how Derek and Patricia had managed to turn my pregnancy, which should have been our greatest joy, into a weapon against our marriage. Amanda's engagement dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday at Chez Laurent, the most expensive restaurant in a 50-mile radius. Patricia had insisted on hosting an elaborate celebration for 30 guests, including extended family members who rarely gathered for anything less than weddings or funerals. The invitation had arrived with elegant calligraphy and formal wording that made it clear this wasn't just dinner. It was a statement about Amanda's importance in the family hierarchy. I'd been dreading the evening all week, partly because of the ongoing tension with Jake, and partly because I knew Patricia would use the gathering to further her agenda. Derek's name had appeared on the guest list described as a family friend, which meant Patricia was now officially integrating him into our social circle. Jake had barely spoken to me since the incident at our house. He'd been sleeping on the couch every night, claiming he needed space to process his feelings, but I could see the doubt eating away at him. He'd started working late at school, finding excuses to grade papers in his classroom rather than coming home to face the awkwardness between us. "We don't have to go to this dinner," I told him on Friday evening as he sat at the kitchen table with a stack of math tests. "I could call in sick." "Your sister's engagement dinner." Jake looked up with surprise. "You can't miss that. It would create more problems than it would solve." He was right, of course. Patricia would never forgive such a slight, and Amanda would be hurt by my absence. But the thought of spending an evening watching Derek charm our family while Jake questioned our marriage felt overwhelming. "Besides," Jake added quietly, "maybe it's time I saw this situation for what it really is." The comment sent a chill down my spine. Jake was preparing himself for some kind of revelation or confrontation, and I suspected Derek was counting on exactly that reaction. Saturday arrived with the first cold snap of the season, requiring me to choose between the few dressy outfits that would still fit comfortably over my barely noticeable pregnancy bump. I settled on a navy wrap dress that was elegant but not attention-grabbing, paired with simple jewelry that Jake had given me for our first anniversary. The drive to Chez Laurent was tense and quiet. Jake wore his best suit, the charcoal one we'd bought for Amanda's engagement party, but his usual pre-social event cheerfulness was noticeably absent. He stared out the passenger window at the familiar streets of our town as if seeing them for the first time. Whatever happens tonight, I said as we pulled into the restaurant parking lot, I want you to remember that I love you. Only you. Jake turned to look at me, and for a moment his expression softened. I love you too, Bernie. That's what makes this so hard. The restaurant was everything Patricia had promised: white tablecloths, crystal stemware, and prices that would make most people reconsider their appetizer choices. She'd reserved the private dining room, which was decorated with white roses and gold accents that complemented Amanda's engagement ring perfectly. Amanda looked radiant in a cream-colored cocktail dress that highlighted her golden hair and tanned skin. She was glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from being surrounded by people who love and support your choices. Marcus stood beside her in a perfectly tailored suit, playing the role of devoted fiancé with natural ease. Bernardine. Amanda rushed over to hug me as soon as we entered the room. I'm so glad you're here. This whole evening feels surreal. You look beautiful, I told her sincerely. Absolutely radiant. Thanks. I keep pinching myself to make sure this is really happening. Marcus, his parents, this restaurant, it's all like a fairy tale. The comment reminded me how young 25 really was, how much Amanda still saw her life through the lens of romantic fantasy rather than practical reality. At her age, I'd been similarly optimistic about love conquering all obstacles before learning how external pressures could complicate even the strongest relationships. Patricia appeared in a stunning black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She'd had her hair professionally styled and was wearing the diamond earrings that had belonged to Jake's grandmother, creating an overall impression of wealth and sophistication that would intimidate most of the guests. "Jer, Bernardine, sweetheart," she said, air-kissing my cheek with practiced precision. "You look lovely, and Jake's so handsome in that suit." Her tone was warm but somehow managed to convey that Jake's suit, while adequate, wasn't quite on the level of the other men in the room. It was a masterclass in subtle condescension, delivered with a smile that made it impossible to object without seeming oversensitive. Derek arrived 15 minutes after we did, making an entrance that seemed calculated to draw attention. He wore a navy suit that was obviously custom-tailored, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most successful person in any room. Several guests turned to look as he greeted Patricia with a warm embrace and genuine enthusiasm. "Mrs. Williams, you've outdone yourself," he said, gesturing toward the elegant table settings. "This is exactly the kind of celebration Amanda and Marcus deserve." The compliment was perfectly pitched to reinforce Patricia's sense of having provided appropriately for her favored daughter, while implying that others might not be capable of such generosity. Derek was aligning himself with Patricia's values and standards, presenting himself as someone who understood and appreciated the finer things in life. "Derek, I'm so pleased you could join us," Patricia beamed. "Come meet Amanda's future in-laws. I think you'll find you have a lot in common." The introduction to Dr. and Mrs. Thompson was clearly orchestrated to showcase Derek's professional success and social connections. Within minutes, he was discussing pharmaceutical trends with Dr. Thompson, while Mrs. Thompson admired his watch and asked about his travel experiences. I watched Jake observe these interactions with growing discomfort. Derek's ease with expensive surroundings and sophisticated conversation made Jake's more modest background increasingly obvious by comparison. When Derek mentioned his recent business trip to Switzerland, Jake unconsciously touched his own watch, a simple Timex he'd owned since college. The seating arrangement was another of Patricia's calculated moves. She'd placed Derek directly across from Jake and me, ensuring maximum opportunity for comparison and conversation. Amanda and Marcus anchored one end of the table, surrounded by her college friends and their successful boyfriends. Jake and I were positioned among the family members, most of whom were curious about Derek's presence and eager to hear about his impressive career. Derek, tell us about your work, prompted my Aunt Helen, who'd driven down from South Carolina for the dinner. Patricia mentioned you're in pharmaceuticals. Derek launched into a charming explanation of his role in bringing new medications to market, emphasizing the travel, the six-figure income, and the satisfaction of helping doctors provide better care for their patients. He made his work sound both lucrative and humanitarian, appealing to multiple values simultaneously. It's demanding, he said modestly, but rewarding to know that you're making a real difference in people's lives while building a secure future. The comment was directed toward the table generally, but his eyes found mine as he spoke about building a secure future. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Derek could provide both meaningful work and financial stability, unlike some other people at the table. "What about you, Jake?" Dr. Thompson asked politely. "What field are you in?" "On teaching," Jake replied simply. "Fourth grade at Riverside Elementary." "How admirable," Mrs. Thompson said, though her tone suggested she found teaching more charitable than admirable. Such an important profession, even if it's not well compensated. The pause before well compensated was devastating. Mrs. Thompson had managed to acknowledge teaching's social value while highlighting its financial limitations, making Jake's career choice sound like noble but impractical idealism. "The rewards aren't always monetary," Jake said carefully, "but helping kids discover they're capable of more than they thought, that's worth something." "Absolutely," Derek agreed heartily. "Public service is incredibly valuable to society. We need people who are willing to prioritize giving back over personal advancement." The comment was poisonous in its apparent support. Derek was positioning Jake's career as charity work rather than professional achievement, implying that teaching was something you did when you couldn't succeed in more competitive fields. As the evening progressed, Patricia orchestrated conversations that consistently highlighted Derek's advantages while downplaying Jake's strengths. She asked Derek about his car, his apartment in Atlanta, his thoughts on various vacation destinations that were clearly beyond our financial reach. She asked Jake about his students and his coaching responsibilities, framing his work as a hobby rather than a career. The conversation that broke my heart came during the main course when Patricia raised her wine glass for a toast. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate Amanda and Marcus," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the private dining room. "As a mother, there's nothing more satisfying than seeing your children make choices that ensure their happiness and security." She paused to smile at Amanda and Marcus, who were glowing with love and champagne-induced euphoria. "Amanda has always been my practical daughter," Patricia continued. "She's thoughtful about major decisions, careful about timing, and wise enough to choose a partner who can provide the kind of life she deserves." The words were ostensibly about Amanda, but every person at the table understood the subtext. Patricia was praising one daughter's practical choices while implying that her other daughter had been less wise in her decision-making. "Marcus has proven himself in his profession, established financial security, and demonstrated the kind of maturity that makes for a strong foundation," Patricia went on. "Some people rush into major commitments without considering all the implications, but these two have done everything the right way, so." Derek raised his glass with enthusiasm, clearly enjoying the implicit criticism of my marriage. Jake's face was stone, but I could see the muscle ticking in his jaw as he processed Patricia's very public assessment of his worthiness as a husband. "To Amanda and Marcus," Patricia concluded, "and to the bright future they're building together." The toast was followed by enthusiastic applause and congratulations, but I felt like I'd been slapped in front of 30 witnesses. Patricia had used her daughter's engagement dinner to publicly undermine my marriage while elevating Derek as an example of the kind of man who made appropriate choices. After dinner, during the cocktail reception, Derek approached Jake while I was in the restroom. I returned to find them engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation near the restaurant's windows. Derek was speaking earnestly, his hand on Jake's shoulder, in a gesture that looked supportive but felt threatening. "What were you two talking about?" I asked when Derek moved away to speak with other guests. "Nothing important," Jake said, but his expression was troubled. Derek was just offering some perspective on marriage and financial pressure. "What kind of perspective?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching Derek charm my aunt and uncle with stories about his latest business success. "He thinks I should consider what's best for you in the long run. Whether staying married to someone who can't provide properly for you is really fair." The psychological manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Derek had convinced my husband that the loving thing to do would be to set me free to find someone who could better support me financially. He'd turned Jake's love for me into a weapon against our marriage. "Jake, that's insane," I said urgently. "Derek is trying to destroy our marriage. Can't you see that?" "I can see that he's successful and confident and obviously still cares about you," Jake replied quietly. "And I can see that your mother thinks you made a mistake marrying me." "My mother is wrong, and Derek doesn't care about me. He cares about winning, about proving he can take back something he lost." But even as I said the words, I could see that Jake was already half convinced by Derek's arguments. The systematic assault on his confidence had worked, leaving him questioning not just his ability to provide for me, but whether love was enough to justify keeping me tied to a limited future. As we drove home that night, the silence between us felt final somehow. Jake stared out at the dark streets, while I tried to figure out how to repair damage that felt increasingly irreversible. "I've been thinking," Jake said as we pulled into our driveway, "maybe we should take some time apart. Let you figure out what you really want without the pressure of trying to make me feel better about my limitations." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. Derek's campaign had succeeded in convincing Jake that our marriage was holding me back, that the loving thing to do would be to step aside so I could choose someone more worthy of my love. "I don't want time apart," I said desperately. "I want my husband back. I want us to fight together against the people who are trying to destroy what we have." "What if they're right, though?" Jake asked quietly. "What if I really can't give you the life you deserve?" That night, after Jake went to sleep on the couch again, I sat in our bedroom and made a decision that should have been made weeks ago. Tomorrow, I was going to tell him about the pregnancy and put an end to this nightmare once and for all. Whatever Patricia's timeline demanded, whatever games Derek was playing, they couldn't continue to poison our marriage. But as I was finally drifting off to sleep, my phone buzzed with a text message from Derek. "Hope you enjoyed dinner tonight. Your mother and I have been discussing some interesting possibilities for your future. Looking forward to sharing them with you soon." The message felt like a threat, wrapped in pleasant language. Derek and Patricia were coordinating their efforts now, and whatever they had planned next was going to be even worse than what I'd already endured. Sunday morning brought what felt like the final assault on my marriage. I woke to find Jake sitting at our kitchen table with his laptop, open, surrounded by printed real estate listings and financial documents. The sight made my stomach drop because I recognized the focused intensity he only showed when making major decisions. "What's all this?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "I've been researching apartment rentals," Jake said without looking up from his screen. "One-bedroom places I can afford on my salary. I think we need to make this separation official." The word separation hung in the air like a death sentence. After weeks of watching Derek and Patricia systematically undermine Jake's confidence, they'd finally convinced him that leaving me was the right thing to do. "Jake, please don't do this," I said, sitting across from him. "We can work through whatever problems we're having." "Can we?" He finally met my eyes, and I saw a man who'd been broken down by constant criticism and comparison, because I've been doing a lot of thinking and maybe everyone else is right. Maybe I rushed you into marriage before you were ready to settle for someone like me. "Someone like you," I felt my voice rising. "You mean someone kind and loyal and genuinely good? Someone who loves me for who I am instead of what I can do for their image?" Someone who can't afford to take you to Switzerland or buy you nice jewelry or provide the kind of life your sister is going to have, Jake said bitterly. Someone whose biggest achievement is getting fourth graders to pass their reading tests. The pain in his voice was devastating because I could hear that he'd started to believe the cruel narrative Derek and Patricia had constructed about his worth. They'd taken this confident, capable man and convinced him that his love wasn't enough. Those things don't matter to me, I said desperately. They never have. Maybe they should, though. Maybe Derek and your mother are right about what's important for a stable future. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Patricia's timing was, as always, suspiciously perfect. She had an uncanny ability to call during our most vulnerable moments, as if she could sense when additional pressure would be most effective. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said brightly. "I hope you enjoyed dinner last night. Everyone was so impressed with Derek." "Mom, this isn't a good time," I said, watching Jake gather his rental listings into a neat pile. "Oh, I just wanted to let you know that Derek stopped by this morning. He had some very interesting things to share about his conversation with Jake last night." My blood ran cold. Derek had been reporting back to Patricia about his psychological manipulation of my husband, treating their destruction of my marriage like a collaborative project. "What kind of things?" "Well, he mentioned that Jake seems to be having doubts about whether he can provide adequately for a wife. Derek was quite concerned about Jake's state of mind, actually. He thinks Jake might be feeling overwhelmed by the financial pressures of marriage." Patricia's tone was sympathetic, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath. She was enjoying Jake's crisis of confidence because it served her larger goal of breaking us apart. Derek also mentioned that he'd be happy to help if Jake needed any career guidance. Patricia continued, "You know advice about transitioning into a more lucrative field. He has connections in pharmaceutical sales that might be useful." The offer was insulting on multiple levels. Derek was positioning himself as Jake's mentor while simultaneously suggesting that Jake's teaching career was inadequate and needed to be abandoned. It was psychological warfare disguised as helpful advice. "Jake doesn't need career advice from Derek," I said firmly. "Are you sure about that, dear? Because from what Derek observed, Jake seems quite unhappy with his current situation. Maybe a change would be good for both of you." After hanging up, I found Jake loading his clothes into a duffel bag in our bedroom. The sight of him packing made everything suddenly terrifyingly real. Patricia and Derek's campaign wasn't just damaging our marriage, it was succeeding in ending it. "Where are you going?" I asked, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. "I found a furnished studio apartment across town," Jake said without looking at me. "Month-to-month lease. I can move in today if I want to." "Jake, please. Before you do anything irreversible, there's something I need to tell you." He paused in his packing, finally turning to face me. "What?" I took a deep breath, knowing that this revelation would either save our marriage or complicate its destruction in ways I couldn't predict. "I'm pregnant." The words hung between us for what felt like an eternity. Jake's expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been joy before settling into something darker. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Jake sat heavily on the edge of our bed. "You've known for 3 weeks and didn't tell me." My mother asked me to wait. She wanted Amanda to have her engagement time without any distractions. Even as I said it, I realized how weak the explanation sounded. I'd allowed Patricia to manipulate me into keeping the most important news of our marriage, secret giving Derek and Patricia 3 weeks to poison Jake's mind while I said nothing. "So your mother's timeline was more important than sharing this with your husband," Jake said, and I could hear the hurt beneath his anger. "No, that's not what I meant. She put pressure on me, and I thought it would only be for a couple of weeks." "A couple of weeks that Derek and your mother spent convincing me I wasn't good enough for you," Jake said, standing up abruptly. "A couple of weeks when I was questioning everything about our marriage while you kept this secret." "I was trying to protect Amanda's feelings," I said weakly. Well, what about my feelings? What about our marriage? Jake's voice rose for the first time since this nightmare began. I've been beating myself up for weeks, wondering if I could provide for a family, while you already knew we were going to have one. The irony was devastating. While Derek questioned Jake's ability to support children and Patricia praised Marcus's financial readiness for fatherhood, Jake had been unknowingly preparing to become a father himself. My silence had allowed them to attack his parenting capabilities while he was already going to be a parent. I was going to tell you, I said desperately. I was waiting for the right moment. The right moment. Jake laughed bitterly. When would that have been? After Derek convinced me to file for divorce after I moved out and gave up on us entirely. He was right, and I knew it. My decision to prioritize Patricia's demands over my marriage had created the very crisis I'd been trying to avoid. By keeping the pregnancy secret, I'd allowed Derek and Patricia to systematically destroy Jake's confidence during the time when he should have been celebrating our growing family. Jake, I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. Can we? He resumed, packing his movements sharp and angry. Because right now I don't know what to believe. Your mother clearly thinks Derek would be a better father for this baby than I would be. Maybe she's right. The suggestion that Derek could be the baby's father was so shocking that it took me a moment to process what Jake was saying. You think I cheated on you? I think Derek's been showing up in your life at very convenient times, Jake said without meeting my eyes. I think your mother's been pushing you toward him pretty aggressively, and I think the timing of this pregnancy is interesting given when Derek came back to town. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Derek and Patricia's manipulation had been so effective that Jake was now questioning the paternity of our child. They'd taken his trust in me, the foundation of everything we'd built together, and poisoned it completely. Yeah, Jake, this baby is yours, I said, tears streaming down my face. I have never, ever cheated on you. Derek kissed me against my will yesterday, and I pushed him away. That's the only physical contact we've had. You didn't mention that kiss, Jake pointed out. Because I knew it would upset you, and it didn't mean anything. I was trying to protect you from Derek's games. Like you were protecting Amanda by keeping the pregnancy secret, Jake said coldly. You seem to do a lot of protecting that involves lying to me. He was right again, and the pattern looked damning when laid out clearly. I'd made a series of decisions designed to manage other people's feelings while leaving Jake in the dark about crucial information. From his perspective, my behavior looked secretive and possibly deceptive. I never lied to you, I said weakly. You kept a pregnancy secret for 3 weeks while I questioned whether I could be a good enough husband and father, Jake replied. That feels like lying to me. My phone buzzed with another text from Derek. Heard Jake's having doubts about the marriage. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Always. The message felt like salt in an open wound. Derek somehow knew about our fight, which meant either Patricia had been monitoring our situation or Derek himself was watching our house. The surveillance felt invasive and threatening. Jake saw me reading the text and his expression hardened further. Let me guess, Derek offering his support during our difficult time? I showed him the message, hoping transparency would help, but Jake's reaction was the opposite of what I'd hoped for. He sure is well informed about our private business, Jake observed, almost like someone's been keeping him updated on our relationship status. The implication was clear. Jake suspected I'd been in regular contact with Derek, sharing details about our marriage problems. The truth was that Patricia had been feeding Derek information, but from Jake's perspective, the source of Derek's knowledge was irrelevant. I haven't been talking to Derek about us, I said firmly. Then how does he know about our problems? I couldn't answer without explaining Patricia's role in orchestrating the entire campaign against our marriage. And I wasn't sure Jake was ready to believe that his mother-in-law was actively working to destroy his relationship with me. Jake finished packing in silence, then carried his duffel bag toward the front door. I followed him, desperate to find some way to repair the damage before it became permanent. Jake, please don't leave. We're having a baby. We should be celebrating, not falling apart. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. You're having a baby, Bernardine. I'm just the guy who's been questioning whether he's worthy of being involved. You are worthy. You're going to be an amazing father. Maybe, Jake said quietly, but right now I need time to figure out what's real and what's been manipulated. I need space to think without Derek showing up at our house or your mother calling with helpful suggestions about my inadequacies. After Jake left, I sat in our suddenly empty house and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a happily married woman with wonderful news to share. Now I was alone, pregnant, and watching my marriage disintegrate under the pressure of external manipulation. But as I sat there, my initial despair began transforming into something else: rage. Derek and Patricia had systematically destroyed my happiness, turning my pregnancy announcement into a weapon against my marriage. They'd taken Jake's love for me and used it to convince him that leaving was the right thing to do. For the first time since this nightmare began, I started thinking like a fighter rather than a victim. If Derek and Patricia wanted to play psychological warfare, it was time to show them what a real battle looked like. The envelope arrived by courier on Monday afternoon while I was at the hospital trying to pretend everything was normal during my 12-hour shift in the emergency department. Mrs. Chen at the nurses' station signed for it, commenting that it looked official and important. When I saw my name written in Patricia's distinctive handwriting, my hands started shaking before I even opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 made out to Jake, along with a typed letter on Patricia's real estate company letterhead. The letter was written in the formal language Patricia used for her most serious business transactions, but the content was personal and devastating. "Oh, dear Jake," it began. "I hope you'll forgive the direct approach, but recent events have convinced me that sometimes difficult conversations require clear actions. As Bernardine's mother, I feel obligated to address the challenges your marriage is facing before they cause irreparable harm to everyone involved." I had to sit down as I read the rest of the letter. Patricia had constructed a careful argument about how young marriages often suffered when couples rushed into major commitments without adequate preparation. She referenced financial pressures and incompatible life goals as common causes of marital breakdown. She suggested that both Jake and I would be happier if we acknowledged these incompatibilities before children complicated the situation further. The final paragraph was the most shocking. "The enclosed check represents my sincere wish that you consider what would be best for Bernardine's future and that of any children she may have. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is step aside so the people we care about can find the happiness and security they deserve. I trust you want what's best for my daughter, even if it means making a difficult personal sacrifice." Patricia was offering Jake $50,000 to divorce me. She'd reduced our marriage to a financial transaction, suggesting that Jake's love for me should motivate him to accept payment for removing himself from my life. The calculation was breathtaking in its cruelty and precision. I called Jake immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried the school, but they said he'd left early for a dentist appointment. When I finally reached him at 6 o'clock that evening, his voice sounded hollow and defeated. "Did you know?" he asked without preamble. "Know what?" "About the check. About your mother's offer to pay me to leave you alone." My heart sank. "Jake, where are you?" "At my apartment. The one I rented this morning after spending the night in my car in the school parking lot." The image of my husband sleeping in his car rather than coming home broke my heart completely. Jake had been so devastated by our fight that he'd essentially become homeless rather than face the continued assault on our marriage. "I just found out about the check an hour ago," I said. "Patricia had it delivered to my work. I had no idea she was planning this." $50,000, Jake said quietly. That's more money than I make in a year teaching, more than we've ever had in our savings account. It's blood money, I said firmly. It's a bribe designed to destroy our family. Or it's a realistic assessment of what I'm actually worth in this situation, Jake replied. Your mother is offering me more money than I've ever seen to walk away and let you find someone who can actually provide for you and our baby. The resignation in his voice was terrifying. Patricia's financial offer had been perfectly calibrated to reinforce Jake's insecurities about his worth as a husband and provider. $50,000 was enough to change his life significantly, while also highlighting how little he earned in comparison to men like Derek or Marcus. Jake, you're not seriously considering this. I don't know what I'm considering anymore, he said honestly. 3 days ago, I thought we had a strong marriage. Yesterday, I found out you've been keeping a pregnancy secret for weeks. Today, your mother offered me more money than I'll probably ever see again to disappear from your life. Because she's manipulative and cruel, not because her offer makes sense. Does it, though, make sense? Jake's voice was getting quieter, more distant. Because when I look at this situation objectively, maybe she has a point. Maybe you would be better off with someone who doesn't need to be paid to provide adequately for a family. I could hear him slipping away, convinced by Patricia's twisted logic that accepting her money would be an act of love rather than betrayal. The psychological manipulation was complete. She'd made him believe that destroying our marriage was the right thing to do. Where did this money come from? I asked, suddenly realizing that Patricia's real estate business, while successful, didn't typically generate that kind of liquid capital. What do you mean? $50,000 in a cashier's check. That's not money Patricia would have sitting around. She'd have to liquidate investments or borrow against something significant. Jake was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him rustling through papers. The letter mentions that she's been consulting with financial advisors about family planning and investment strategies. Maybe she's been preparing for this. The idea that Patricia had been planning this campaign for months was chilling but not surprising. She'd probably started strategizing the moment I married Jake, calculating how to break us apart if I ever did something that disrupted her plans for our family. Jake, I'm coming over. We need to talk about this in person. I don't think that's a good idea right now. Why not? Jake hesitated, and I heard voices in the background of the call. Male voices, including one that sounded familiar and made my stomach clench with recognition. Is Derek there? I asked. He stopped by to check on me. Your mother was worried about how I was handling everything. The coordination between Patricia and Derek was becoming increasingly obvious and sinister. They were tag-teaming the destruction of my marriage, with Patricia handling the financial pressure, while Derek provided emotional manipulation disguised as friendship and support. Jake, Derek is not your friend. He's working with my mother to break us up so he can try to get me back. He's trying to help me think through a complicated situation, Jake said defensively. He understands the financial pressures better than I do. In the background, I could hear Derek's voice offering what sounded like reasonable, supportive advice. He was probably presenting himself as Jake's advocate, the successful friend who understood the challenges of providing for a family and could offer practical guidance. What kind of help is he offering? He thinks I should consider Patricia's offer seriously. He says it would give me a chance to go back to school, maybe get an MBA, or transition into a more lucrative career. Start fresh without the pressure of supporting a pregnant wife. Derek's strategy was brilliant and evil. He was framing Patricia's bribe as an opportunity for Jake's personal growth and development, making acceptance of the money sound like self-improvement rather than abandonment of his family. And what happens to me and the baby while you're getting your MBA? Jake's voice got even quieter. Derek thinks you'd probably be happier with someone who's already established financially, someone who could provide immediately rather than eventually. Someone like Derek, you mean? He didn't say that specifically, but Yeah, maybe someone like Derek. I felt like I was watching my husband being brainwashed in real time. Derek had positioned himself as Jake's supportive friend while systematically convincing him that leaving me was not only acceptable, but necessary for everyone's happiness. Jake, I'm pregnant with your baby. We've been married for 2 years. We love each other. Why would you let Derek and my mother convince you to throw all of that away? Because maybe they're right about what's best for you and the baby, Jake said, and I could hear him crying. Maybe love isn't enough if I can't provide the kind of life you deserve. The call ended abruptly, and when I tried to call back, Jake's phone was turned off. I sat in our empty house staring at Patricia's check and letter, trying to understand how someone could be so calculating in their cruelty toward their own daughter. But as I read the letter again, something caught my attention. Patricia had mentioned consulting with financial advisors about family planning and investment strategies, but the language was oddly specific and formal. It sounded like legal terminology rather than casual financial advice. I called my friend Sarah, whose husband was a family attorney, and asked if she could recommend someone who specialized in unusual custody situations. Something about Patricia's letter suggested that her campaign against my marriage might have legal implications I hadn't considered. Why do you need a custody attorney? Sarah asked, confused. You and Jake aren't divorced. Not yet, I said grimly, but I think my mother might be planning ahead. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Patricia's precise language and Derek's coordinated assistance, wondering if their partnership was more sophisticated than I'd realized. The $50,000 offer wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was evidence of a conspiracy to destroy my marriage and potentially gain access to my child. Around midnight, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to react to Patricia and Derek's moves, it was time to start gathering evidence of what they were actually doing. If they wanted to play psychological warfare, I needed to understand the full scope of their plan. I started with Patricia's real estate business records, which were public information. Then I began documenting every text message, phone call, and interaction Derek and Patricia had initiated. By morning, I had the beginning of a picture that was much darker and more coordinated than I'd imagined. Patricia and Derek weren't just trying to break up my marriage for emotional reasons. They were systematically building a case for why Jake was an unfit husband and father, creating a paper trail that could be used in future legal proceedings. The $50,000 offer wasn't a bribe, it was evidence of Jake's supposed greed and willingness to abandon his family for money. I was fighting something much more dangerous than family drama. I was fighting a coordinated campaign designed to steal my child before it was even born. Tuesday morning, I took my first sick day in over a year and drove straight to the office of Margaret Chen, the family attorney Sarah had recommended. Her secretary had managed to squeeze me in for an emergency consultation, and I arrived with a folder full of text messages, photos, and Patricia's check still in its original envelope. Margaret was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in complex custody cases and family manipulation. She listened to my story with the kind of focused attention that told me she'd seen similar situations before, though perhaps not with quite this level of sophistication. Your mother is building a custody case, Margaret said after reviewing Patricia's letter and the check. This language about financial inadequacy and what's best for the child, this isn't emotional manipulation. This is legal preparation. But I'm still married to Jake. We're not even separated officially. Yet, Margaret pointed out. But if your marriage dissolves and you have a custody dispute with your ex-husband, grandparents' rights could become relevant, especially if your mother can demonstrate that she's more financially capable of providing for the child than either parent. The possibility had never occurred to me, but Margaret explained how grandparents in Georgia could petition for custody or extensive visitation rights if they could prove that the biological parents were unfit or unable to provide adequately. Patricia's campaign against Jake wasn't just designed to break up our marriage, it was laying the groundwork for a legal claim on my child. The $50,000 offer is particularly troubling, Margaret continued. If your husband accepts it, your mother will have evidence that he's willing to abandon his parental responsibilities for money. If he refuses it, she can argue that he's too prideful to accept help when his family needs it. Either way, she wins. What about Derek's involvement? Margaret's expression darkened as she reviewed Derek's text messages and my account of his behavior. Potential paternity claims. If your marriage ends and there's any question about the baby's biological father, Derek could petition for paternity testing and parental rights. Combined with your mother's financial resources, they could mount a serious challenge to your custody. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Patricia and Derek hadn't just been trying to break up my marriage for emotional satisfaction, they'd been systematically building a legal case to gain control over my child. Every manipulation, every cruel comparison, every coordinated attack had been designed to create evidence they could use in court. What do? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the legal implications of what had seemed like family drama. Document everything, Margaret said firmly. Every text, every phone call, every interaction. Get copies of any financial records you can access. And most importantly, try to get them to admit their coordination in writing or on recording. She gave me a list of specific evidence to gather and recommended a private investigator who specialized in family manipulation cases. As I left her office, I felt like I was preparing for war rather than trying to save my marriage. My phone rang as I was driving home and Derek's name appeared on the screen. For the first time since this nightmare began, I answered with a sense of purpose rather than dread. "Oh, Bernardine, I'm glad I caught you," Derek said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of false concern. "I've been worried about you since Jake told me about your conversation last night." "My conversation with my husband is none of your business," I said, but without the emotional heat that would have been there before my meeting with Margaret. "I understand you're upset, but I think you're misunderstanding my intentions," Derek continued smoothly. "Jake's struggling right now, and I just want to help both of you make the best decisions for your future." "What kind of help are you offering?" "Well, Patricia and I have been discussing the situation, and we think there might be some options you haven't considered." There, it was the admission of coordination I needed. Derek was openly acknowledging that he and Patricia were working together on the situation involving my marriage. "What kind of options?" Derek's tone became more intimate, more persuasive. "You're going to be a mother soon, Bernie. You deserve a partner who can provide properly for you and the baby. Jake's a good guy, but let's be realistic about what he can offer." "And you think you can offer more?" "I know I can. Financial security, social connections, the kind of lifestyle that would give your child every advantage. Patricia agrees that you deserve better than struggling on a teacher's salary." The conversation was exactly what Margaret had warned me about Derek positioning himself as a superior choice for both me and my child, while suggesting that Jake was inadequate. I kept him talking while taking notes on everything he said. "Jake seems to think that $50,000 is a lot of money," I said carefully. "It is for someone in his position," Derek agreed. Patricia was being very generous. Most men in Jake's situation would jump at that kind of opportunity to start over without the burden of responsibilities they're not prepared for. "You think Jake isn't prepared to be a father?" "I think Jake is a good man who's in over his head," Derek said diplomatically. "Fatherhood requires more than good intentions. It requires resources, stability planning, things that take time to develop." He was building the legal case Margaret had warned me about, creating a record of Jake's supposed inadequacy as a potential father. Every word was carefully chosen to sound reasonable while being devastating in its implications. "And you think you'd be better prepared for fatherhood?" Derek's laugh was warm and confident. "Bernie, I've been thinking about starting a family for years. I have the financial foundation, the career stability, the maturity that comes from taking time to establish yourself before taking on major responsibilities. Even with someone else's baby, that baby would be yours, Derek said softly. That's all that would matter to me. I love you, Bernie. I've never stopped loving you. If you'll let me, I'd love to be the father your child deserves. The statement was exactly what Margaret had predicted, a clear assertion that Derek was prepared to claim parental rights to my child if given the opportunity. He was positioning himself as the responsible choice for fatherhood, while painting Jake as inadequate and unprepared. I need to think about all this, I said, ending the call before Derek could become suspicious of my questions. That afternoon, I drove to Jake's apartment complex, determined to warn him about the legal implications of Patricia's offer. The building was a modest complex near the school where he taught, and I found him in a tiny studio apartment that looked like a college dorm room. You shouldn't be here, Jake said when he opened the door, though he stepped aside to let me in. Jake, we need to talk about Patricia's check. It's not what it seems. It's exactly what it seems, Jake said tiredly. Your mother thinks I'm not good enough for you and she's willing to pay me to disappear. It's more than that. It's evidence in a custody case. Jake looked confused, so I explained what Margaret had told me about grandparents' rights and how Patricia's letter could be used in court. I showed him the notes from my conversation with Derek, highlighting how they were building a case against both of us as unfit parents. They're trying to steal our baby, I said bluntly. All of this, the comparisons, the financial pressure, Derek's sudden reappearance, it's all designed to break us up so they can claim custody. Jake sat heavily on his futon, staring at the check that was sitting on his small kitchen table. That's insane. Patricia wouldn't really try to take custody of her grandchild. Wouldn't she? Look at how she's treated our marriage. Look at how she's manipulated both of us. Do you really think she'd stop at stealing our child if she thought she could get away with it? For the first time since this nightmare began, I could see Jake starting to understand the true scope of what we were facing. The attacks on his self-worth weren't just emotional cruelty, they were strategic moves in a larger game with much higher stakes. What do we do? He asked quietly. We fight back, I said firmly. Together, we document everything, we gather evidence, and we show everyone exactly what kind of people Patricia and Derek really are. Jake looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing everything he'd experienced over the past month against this new understanding of the situation. You really think they'd try to take our baby? I think Patricia believes she has the right to control every aspect of our lives, including our children. And I think Derek sees our baby as a way to get me back by proving he'd be a better father than you. Jake stood up and walked to his kitchen table, picking up Patricia's check and staring at it for a long moment. Then he tore it in half, letting the pieces fall to the floor. What do we do first? He asked. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had my husband back. We were going to fight this battle together the way we should have been doing all along. Wednesday brought an unexpected ally in the form of Jake's sister Carol, who drove down from Athens when Jake finally told her about the separation and Patricia's financial offer. Carol was a licensed family therapist with 15 years of experience in toxic family dynamics, and she took one look at the situation and immediately recognized what we were dealing with. Worse, this is textbook narcissistic manipulation, Carol said, sitting at Jake's tiny kitchen table with Patricia's torn check laid out in front of her like evidence in a crime scene. The golden child versus scapegoat dynamic, the systematic destruction of self-worth, the financial coercion disguised as generosity. Your mother-in-law is running a masterclass in psychological abuse. Jake looked skeptical. Abuse seems like a strong word. Patricia's demanding and controlling, but she's not violent or obviously cruel. Psychological abuse is often more damaging than physical abuse because it's harder to recognize and document, Carol explained patiently. What you're describing is a coordinated campaign to destroy your marriage and undermine your parental rights. That's not family drama, that's systematic abuse with specific goals. Carol's professional perspective was exactly what we needed to understand the scope of Patricia's tactics. She helped us create a timeline of events, mapping out how each incident had been designed to achieve specific psychological effects. The pattern was undeniable once laid out chronologically. The pregnancy secret demand was the opening move, Carol said, pointing to our timeline. It isolated Bernardine from her primary support system during a crucial time and gave Patricia weeks to work on Jake without interference. And Derek's reintroduction, classic triangulation. Patricia brought in a third party to create comparison and competition, knowing that Jake's insecurities would be triggered by Derek's obvious advantages. The Sunday dinners, the country club dinner, the surprise visits, all calculated to maximize psychological impact. Carol explained how narcissistic manipulation often followed predictable patterns, starting with isolation and moving through systematic destruction of self-worth before offering false rescue in the form of cooperation with the manipulator's agenda. The $50,000 offer was the rescue phase, she continued. Patricia positioned herself as solving Jake's problems by paying him to leave, making her the hero of his story rather than the villain of yours. As Carol was explaining these patterns, my phone rang with a call from Amanda. I'd been dreading talking to my sister since learning about the legal implications of Patricia's behavior, knowing that Amanda was probably unaware of the scope of our mother's manipulation. Bernardine, thank God, Amanda said, her voice tight with stress. I need to talk to you about Mom. Something really strange is happening. What kind of strange? She's been asking me weird questions about you and Jake, about your finances, your marriage, whether I think you're happy. And she keeps bringing up Derek, asking if I think you made the right choice marrying Jake instead of him. This was new information. Patricia had been using Amanda as an intelligence source, gathering information about our relationship that could be used in her campaign against us. What kind of questions about our finances? She wanted to know if Jake had any debt, what kind of car you drive, whether you'd ever mentioned having trouble paying bills. She said she was worried about your financial stability with a baby coming. The intelligence gathering was more extensive than I'd realized. Patricia hadn't just been attacking Jake's confidence, she'd been systematically collecting information that could be used to build a legal case about our fitness as parents. Amanda, there's something you need to know about Mom and Derek. Can you meet us somewhere to talk? An hour later, Amanda sat in Jake's apartment looking shocked and pale as we explained what Patricia and Derek had been doing. Carol's professional analysis helped Amanda understand how she'd been manipulated as well, used as both an intelligence source and a comparison point to make me feel inadequate. I had no idea, Amanda said, tears streaming down her face. I thought Mom was just being protective of you, and Derek seemed so nice, so interested in catching up with our family. It's not your fault, I assured her. You couldn't have known what they were really planning. Amanda was quiet for a long moment, processing everything we'd told her. Then she looked up with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of anger and determination that reminded me of our mother at her most formidable. There's something else, Amanda said quietly, something I found in Mom's purse last week that didn't make sense until now. She pulled out her phone and showed us a photo she'd taken of small white pills in an unmarked bottle. I thought they were vitamins or something, but they were hidden in a side pocket with some kind of medical paperwork. Carol examined the photo and frowned. These look like fertility medications. Clomiphene, maybe, or something similar. Why would your mother have fertility drugs? She wouldn't, Amanda said slowly, unless... Oh my God, she's been giving them to me. The revelation hit us like a physical blow. Patricia had been secretly medicating Amanda with fertility drugs, trying to force the pregnancy timeline she demanded, while keeping me silent about my own pregnancy. The vitamins she's been bringing me, Amanda continued, her voice getting stronger with anger. She said they were special prenatal vitamins from her doctor, that they'd help me get pregnant faster. I've been taking them every day for 2 months. The scope of Patricia's manipulation was staggering. She'd been drugging one daughter to forced pregnancy while emotionally terrorizing the other daughter for being pregnant first. The level of control she was exerting over our reproductive lives was not just manipulative, it was potentially dangerous. Amanda, you need to see a doctor immediately, Carol said firmly. Taking fertility medications without medical supervision can be very dangerous, especially if you were already pregnant and didn't know it. I can't be pregnant, Amanda said automatically. Marcus and I have been trying for 9 months with no success. Because you might have been taking the wrong medications or the wrong dosages, Carol explained. Your mother isn't a doctor. She could have been giving you anything. While Amanda was processing this revelation, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Hope you're thinking about our conversation yesterday. Patricia and I are both here if you need support during this difficult time. The casual mention of Patricia confirmed what I already suspected. They were in constant communication about their campaign against my marriage. But seeing it in writing while Amanda sat there learning about Patricia's drugging scheme made the coordination seem even more sinister. I want to help, Amanda said suddenly. Whatever you need to do to stop Mom and Derek, I want to help. Amanda, you don't have to get involved in this. Patricia's your mother too, and you're getting married next month. She's been drugging me, Amanda said, her voice rising with anger. She's been using me to spy on you and Jake. She's been manipulating both of us to fit some sick plan she's had all along. This isn't about being my mother anymore. This is about stopping someone who's dangerous. Carol nodded approvingly. Amanda's testimony about the fertility drugs would be crucial evidence of Patricia's willingness to endanger her own children to maintain control. That's exactly the kind of documentation that would be powerful in court. That evening, Amanda went home and did something that required tremendous courage. She confronted Patricia directly about the fertility medications while secretly recording the conversation on her phone. Mom, I need to ask you about these vitamins you've been giving me, Amanda said, and we could hear Patricia's voice in the background dismissing the question as unimportant. What kind of vitamins, sweetie? I just want to make sure you're getting proper nutrition. These vitamins, Amanda pressed, and we could hear the sound of pills rattling in a bottle. The ones that look exactly like clomiphene fertility drugs. The silence on the recording stretched for several seconds before Patricia's voice returned, but now it sounded different, colder, more calculating. I don't know what you're talking about, Amanda. Those are prenatal vitamins from my doctor. Mom, I looked them up. These are prescription fertility drugs. You've been giving me prescription medication without telling me. You're being ridiculous, Patricia said, but her tone was defensive now. I was just trying to help you conceive faster. You and Marcus want children right away, and sometimes nature needs a little assistance. You could have killed me, Amanda said, her voice shaking. Taking fertility drugs without medical supervision can cause ovarian cysts, blood clots, multiple pregnancies. You could have seriously hurt me. Don't be so dramatic, Patricia snapped, and now her true personality was emerging on the recording. I researched the dosages carefully. You're fine, and you'll probably conceive much faster thanks to my help. Is that what this is about? Making sure I get pregnant before Bernardine? Another long silence. And when Patricia spoke again, her voice was completely different, cold and calculating in a way that made my skin crawl. Bernardine has made some poor choices, Amanda. Poor choice in husband, poor timing with pregnancy, poor judgment about what's important in life. I'm simply making sure you don't make the same mistakes. What do you mean, poor timing with pregnancy? Your sister announced her pregnancy at exactly the wrong moment, disrupting your engagement celebration and stealing focus from your important milestones. Some people have no consideration for family harmony. Amanda's voice grew stronger. Mom, Bernardine didn't choose when to get pregnant to hurt me. These things happen when they happen. Do they? Patricia's tone was becoming openly hostile now. Or do some people plan pregnancies specifically to get attention and disrupt other people's happiness? You think Bernardine got pregnant on purpose to hurt me? I think Bernardine has always been jealous of your success and your good choices, Patricia said bluntly, and I think this pregnancy is just another way of trying to compete with you for attention. The recording captured Patricia's true feelings about both of her daughters. Amanda was the prize to be controlled and manipulated, while I was the problem to be managed and eliminated. Her willingness to endanger Amanda's health to maintain control over our family's timeline revealed a level of narcissism that was genuinely frightening. When Amanda played the recording for us the next day, Jake's remaining doubts about the scope of Patricia's manipulation finally disappeared. Here was our evidence of coordination of deliberate endangerment and of the twisted psychology driving Patricia's campaign against our family. We have her, Carol said with satisfaction. This recording, combined with the fertility drugs and the financial coercion, creates a clear pattern of abusive behavior that any court would recognize. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we had a real chance of stopping Patricia and Derek before they could succeed in destroying our family. But I also knew that having evidence was only the beginning. Now we had to figure out how to use it effectively without escalating the situation into open warfare that could hurt Amanda's upcoming wedding and our unborn child. The battle for our family's future was about to enter a much more dangerous phase. Friday morning brought the breakthrough we'd been hoping for, though it came from an unexpected source. Marcus called Jake directly, his usually calm demeanor shaken by something he'd discovered during his own investigation into Patricia's behavior. Jake, I need to meet with you and Bernardine as soon as possible. Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. There are some things about Patricia's business dealings that you need to know before this situation gets any worse. As a successful dentist with his own practice, Marcus had developed a network of professional contacts that included accountants, lawyers, and financial advisors. When Amanda had told him about the fertility drugs and Patricia's manipulation, he'd quietly started asking questions about Patricia's recent financial activities. Your mother-in-law has been liquidating assets for the past 6 months, Marcus explained when we met at his office that afternoon. She's borrowed against her real estate holdings, cashed out investment accounts, and taken a second mortgage on her house. The $50,000 she offered Jake is just the beginning. Jake looked stunned. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate. She's raised close to $200,000 in liquid cash over the past 6 months. That's not money you accumulate for normal family emergencies, that's litigation funding. The scope of Patricia's financial preparation was staggering. She'd been systematically converting her wealth into cash that could be used for legal fees, private investigators, and whatever other resources she might need to fight a custody battle. But why would she need that much money? I asked, though I was starting to suspect the answer. Marcus pulled out a folder of documents he'd obtained through his professional contacts. Because she's been consulting with one of the most expensive family law firms in Atlanta, Berkowitz, Hamilton and Associates. They specialize in complex custody cases involving wealthy clients. My blood ran cold. Berkowitz, Hamilton and Associates was the firm that represented billionaires in high-profile custody battles, the kind of legal team that could overwhelm opponents through sheer financial firepower. There's more, Marcus continued grimly. Derek's involvement isn't just emotional manipulation. He's been paying the retainer fees for Patricia's legal consultations. The revelation that Derek was funding Patricia's legal strategy transformed our understanding of their partnership. This wasn't just psychological manipulation, it was a coordinated legal assault funded by Derek's pharmaceutical income and Patricia's liquidated assets. So Derek's been planning this from the beginning, Jake said slowly. His whole reappearance in our lives was part of a strategy to break up our marriage and gain access to our baby. It gets worse, Marcus said, opening another file. Derek's been working with a private investigator for the past month. They've been documenting your daily activities, your financial situation, your work schedules. They're building a comprehensive case file about your fitness as parents. The invasion of privacy was breathtaking. While we'd been trying to save our marriage, Derek and Patricia had been treating us like subjects under surveillance, gathering evidence that could be used against us in court. What kind of evidence? Marcus looked uncomfortable. Photos of Jake's apartment, documentation of your separated living situation, financial records showing your debt-to-income ratio. They've even been interviewing people from your past college friends, former coworkers, anyone who might have negative things to say about your relationship. The systematic nature of their investigation was both impressive and terrifying. Derek and Patricia had essentially hired a legal team to build a case against us before we'd even realized we were in a battle. They're planning to file for emergency custody as soon as the baby is born, Marcus continued. The strategy is to claim that both parents are unfit, Jake due to financial instability and abandonment of his family, Bernardine due to emotional instability and poor judgment in relationships. Abandonment of his family. I felt my voice rising with anger. Jake didn't abandon anyone. Patricia and Derek manipulated him into leaving. Which is exactly why they created that situation, Marcus explained. They needed evidence that Jake was willing to walk away from his responsibilities. The apartment rental, the separation, even Jake sleeping in his car, it's all being documented as proof of his instability as a father. Every detail of our pain and confusion over the past month had been weaponized against us. Patricia and Derek had created the crisis in our marriage specifically so they could use the resulting chaos as evidence of our unfitness as parents. There's something else, Marcus said, pulling out one final document. Derek's been in contact with Amanda's doctor claiming to be concerned about family medical history related to your pregnancy. He's been trying to get access to medical information that could be used to challenge paternity. The violation felt complete. Derek wasn't just manipulating our emotions and finances, he was trying to access private medical information that could be used to cast doubt on Jake's biological relationship to our child. As we sat in Marcus's office processing the scope of the conspiracy against us, my phone buzzed with what would turn out to be the most incriminating evidence we'd receive. It was a text from Derek, but this message was different from his usual carefully worded manipulations. Patricia's getting impatient with the timeline. If Jake doesn't take the money soon, we'll have to move to phase 2. The private investigator says we have enough evidence to proceed with the custody petition. Time to close this deal. The text had obviously been meant for someone else, probably Patricia or Derek's lawyer, but he'd accidentally sent it to me instead, revealing the calculated nature of their timeline and confirming that there was indeed a phase 2 to their plan. I showed the message to Marcus and Jake, and Marcus's expression grew even more grim. This is exactly what we needed, he said. Proof of coordination, proof of a timeline, and proof that they see your family as a deal to be closed rather than people to be helped. While we were discussing the implications of Derek's accidental revelation, Amanda called with news that would complete the picture of Patricia's deception. I went through Mom's home office while she was at work. Amanda said, her voice shaking with anger. I found a whole file cabinet full of documents about you and Jake. Financial records, printed emails, photos, even copies of your medical bills. How did she get our medical bills? She has a contact at the insurance company, someone she's done real estate deals with. There are emails between them discussing your pregnancy-related expenses and how they could be used to demonstrate financial strain. The network of people Patricia had involved in her scheme was expanding. revealing a level of preparation and coordination that went far beyond family manipulation into the realm of organized conspiracy. But here's the worst part, Amanda continued. I found a legal document that she's already had prepared, a petition for emergency custody that's ready to be filed as soon as your baby is born. It claims that both you and Jake are unfit parents due to financial instability, marital conflict, and what they call reckless disregard for the child's welfare. The prepared legal documents prove that Patricia and Derek had been planning this campaign from the very beginning. They weren't reacting to our marriage problems, they had created our marriage problems specifically to justify their custody claim. Amanda, did you take pictures of everything? I photographed every document in the file, financial records, legal papers, correspondence with Derek, emails with the private investigator. Everything. The evidence Amanda had gathered would be devastating in court, proving not just that Patricia had been manipulating us, but that she'd been doing so as part of a premeditated legal strategy to steal our child. That evening, Jake moved back into our house for the first time in over a week. As we sat together in our living room, surrounded by evidence of the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed our marriage, I felt a strange mixture of relief and anger. I'm sorry, Jake said quietly. I should have seen what they were doing. I should have trusted you and our marriage instead of letting them get into my head. They're professionals at this kind of manipulation, I replied, taking his hand. They've probably been planning this for months, maybe since the day we got married. You can't blame yourself for falling victim to psychological warfare. But I almost let them win. I almost took that money and walked away from you and our baby. But you didn't, I said firmly, and now we know exactly what we're fighting. No more secrets, no more manipulation, no more divide and conquer tactics. From now on, we face everything together. As we held each other on our couch, surrounded by evidence of Patricia and Derek's betrayal, I felt our marriage growing stronger rather than weaker. They'd tried to use our love against us, but in the end, that same love was what would allow us to defeat them. The war for our family was about to reach its climax, but for the first time since it began, I was confident about which side would emerge victorious. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, making Patricia's garden the perfect setting for what would be the most important family gathering of our lives. I'd called Patricia Friday night and requested a family meeting to discuss recent misunderstandings, carefully avoiding any language that might alert her to the scope of what we discovered. Of course, sweetheart. Patricia had said warmly, apparently convinced that I was ready to accept her version of what was best for my family. I'll make brunch. We can have a civilized conversation about everyone's concerns. Jake, Amanda, Marcus, Carol, and I arrived together at Patricia's house, each carrying evidence of her manipulation campaign. Amanda had insisted on being the one to present the fertility drug evidence, while Marcus would handle the financial documentation. Carol would provide professional analysis of the psychological manipulation tactics, and Jake would confront Patricia about the $50,000 bribe. Derek's Mercedes was already in the driveway, confirming that Patricia had invited him to what she presumably thought would be my surrender meeting. The sight of his car made my stomach clench, but it also provided the perfect opportunity to confront both conspirators simultaneously. Patricia answered the door wearing a pale yellow sundress and her most gracious hostess smile, clearly expecting to preside over my capitulation to her plans for my life. Her expression faltered slightly when she saw the size of our group and the serious expressions on our faces. "My, this is quite a gathering," she said, her tone becoming more cautious. "Derek's already here. We can sit in the garden." Derek rose from his seat at Patricia's elegantly set patio table as we filed outside, his confident smile dimming as he registered the hostile energy our group was projecting. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than Jake's monthly groceries, but for once his expensive clothes couldn't disguise his growing uneasiness. "Bernardine," I'm glad you decided to include everyone in this conversation, Derek said carefully. Family decisions should involve family input. This isn't a family decision, I said firmly, taking a seat across from him with Jake beside me. This is a confrontation about what you and Patricia have been doing to my marriage and my family. Patricia's gracious mask slipped further as she processed the word confrontation. She'd clearly expected a negotiation, not an accusation. I'm not sure what you mean, dear, she said, settling into her chair with forced composure. Derek and I have only been trying to help you work through a difficult situation. Yeah, is that what you call drugging me with fertility medications? Amanda said, her voice cutting through Patricia's attempt at deflection. The color drained from Patricia's face as Amanda pulled out the bottle of pills and set them on the table between us. Derek looked genuinely confused by this development, suggesting that Patricia's willingness to endanger Amanda had been her own initiative. Amanda, those were just prenatal vitamins to help. Oh, these are clomiphene. Amanda interrupted, her voice getting stronger with anger. Prescription fertility drugs that you've been giving me without my knowledge or consent for 2 months. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? Patricia's composure began cracking as she realized that Amanda had not only discovered her drug scheme, but was actively confronting her about it. I was trying to help you conceive faster. You and Marcus want children right away. I could have died, Amanda said, standing up, so her voice would carry more authority. Fertility drugs without medical supervision can cause ovarian cysts, blood clots, multiple pregnancies. You could have killed me to satisfy your timeline for grandchildren. Derek was staring at Patricia with what appeared to be genuine shock, as if he was learning about the extent of her manipulation for the first time. Either he was an excellent actor, or Patricia's willingness to endanger her own daughter had exceeded even his expectations for acceptable tactics. Patricia, you didn't tell me about any fertility drugs, Derek said slowly. You said you were just providing nutritional supplements. The crack in their coordination was exactly what we needed. Patricia had been so obsessed with controlling Amanda's pregnancy timeline that she'd kept Derek unaware of her most dangerous manipulation, creating our first opportunity to drive a wedge between them. And there are a lot of things Patricia didn't tell you, Marcus said, pulling out his folder of financial documents, like the fact that she's liquidated over $200,000 in assets to fund a legal campaign against Bernardine and Jake. Derek's shock appeared genuine as Marcus laid out the evidence of Patricia's financial preparations. The scope of her commitment to destroying my marriage was apparently much greater than Derek had realized. Patricia borrowed against her real estate holdings and cashed out investment accounts to raise litigation funding, Marcus continued. She's been consulting with Berkowitz, Hamilton and Associates for months, planning to file for custody of Bernardine's baby as soon as it's born. Custody. Derek looked back and forth between Patricia and me, his confusion seeming authentic. Patricia, you told me this was about helping Bernardine make better choices, not about taking her child. The revelation that Patricia had been planning a custody battle without fully informing Derek suggested that their partnership was less equal than I'd assumed. Patricia had been using Derek's attraction to me and his financial resources while keeping him unaware of the full scope of her legal strategy. Derek has been funding your legal consultations, Marcus said to Patricia, then turned to Derek. Did you know that your retainer payments were going toward a strategy to separate a mother from her newborn child? Derek's expression was shifting from confusion to horror as he began to understand how Patricia had been using him. His attraction to me and his competitive desire to win me back from Jake had been weaponized by Patricia for a much darker purpose than he'd apparently realized. I thought we were just trying to help Bernardine see that she'd be happier with someone more financially stable, Derek said slowly. I never agreed to try to take her baby away from her. Patricia's mask was fully off now, her face twisted with rage at seeing her carefully constructed alliance beginning to crumble. Derek, don't let them manipulate you. You know what's best for Bernardine and the baby. Do I? Derek turned to face Patricia directly, his voice hardening. Because it sounds like you've been using my feelings for Bernardine to fund a plan to steal her child. That's not what I signed up for. This was our opportunity to complete the destruction of their partnership. Carol leaned forward with her professional assessment of Patricia's psychological tactics. What you signed up for was a coordinated manipulation campaign designed to destroy a marriage and separate a mother from her child, Carol said in her calm therapist voice. Patricia identified your emotional vulnerabilities and exploited them to gain your cooperation in systematic psychological abuse. Derek was staring at Patricia now with growing disgust as the pieces fell into place. You've been using me. I've been helping you get what you wanted. Patricia snapped back her composure, finally completely shattered. You said you wanted Bernardine back. You said you could provide better for her than Jake ever could. I wanted to win her back through honest competition, not through destroying her marriage and stealing her child. Derek shot back. There's a difference between romantic pursuit and what you've been planning. The confrontation was spiraling exactly as we'd hoped, with Derek realizing that Patricia had manipulated him into participating in something much darker than he'd intended. But Patricia wasn't finished fighting. Romantic pursuit. Patricia laughed bitterly. Derek, you're 42 years old and single because you can't commit to anything that doesn't serve your career. You don't want Bernardine for love. You want her because she's the one who got away. The personal attack on Derek was devastating and probably accurate, but it also revealed Patricia's willingness to turn on anyone who didn't serve her purposes. She'd used Derek's resources and then discarded him the moment he questioned her methods. And you, Patricia, turned her fury on Amanda, ungrateful daughter, who can't even get pregnant without medical assistance. I was trying to help you succeed where nature was failing. Amanda recoiled as if she'd been slapped, but Marcus immediately stood up to defend his fiancée. Patricia, that's completely unacceptable. Amanda doesn't need your help or your drugs. We're perfectly capable of building our family on our own timeline. Are you... Patricia's voice was becoming shrill now, all pretense of maternal concern abandoned. Because it's been 9 months with no results. Maybe Amanda isn't as perfect as everyone pretends. The cruelty of attacking Amanda's fertility struggles revealed Patricia's true nature more clearly than any of our evidence could. She was willing to destroy both of her daughters to maintain control over their lives and their children. And Jake? Patricia turned her attention to my husband, who'd been quietly watching the confrontation unfold. Poor, naive Jake, who actually believed $50,000 was a generous offer rather than an insult. Do you have any idea how much it's going to cost to raise that child? How much college tuition will be in 18 years? How little your teacher's pension will provide for retirement? Enough, Jake said, standing up with a calm authority I'd rarely seen from him. Patricia, you're done manipulating my family. You've drugged my sister-in-law, bribed me to abandon my wife, hired private investigators to spy on us, and planned to steal our baby. That's not maternal concern, that's psychological warfare. The confrontation had achieved everything we'd hoped for. Patricia's mask was completely off, revealing the calculating narcissist beneath the concerned mother facade. Derek was realizing how thoroughly he'd been manipulated and used. Amanda was seeing Patricia's true feelings about both of her daughters. But Patricia had one final revelation that would change everything. You think you're so smart? She snarled, her voice filled with venom I'd never heard before. You think you figured out my plan and stopped me, but you have no idea how deep this goes. She pulled out her phone and made a call that none of us expected. Yes, this is Patricia Williams. I need to report suspected child endangerment and domestic violence at my daughter's residence. The pregnant mother is being threatened by an unstable husband who's been documented abandoning his family. The phone call was Patricia's final weapon, a false report to Child Protective Services designed to create an official record of our supposed unfitness as parents. Even in defeat, she was still trying to damage our family through the legal system. But as Patricia spoke to the CPS hotline, she was unknowingly providing us with the final piece of evidence we needed. Amanda was still recording everything on her phone, capturing Patricia's willingness to file false reports against her own daughter. When Patricia finished her call and looked around at our shocked faces, she smiled with cold satisfaction. Good luck fighting a CPS investigation on top of everything else. Sometimes the only way to save children is to take them away from parents who don't deserve them. The threat was clear and chilling. Patricia was prepared to use every weapon at her disposal, including false accusations of child abuse to gain control over my baby. But she'd also just provided us with irrefutable evidence of her willingness to file false reports which would be devastating to any custody claim she might try to make. As we left Patricia's house that morning, our confrontation had achieved more than we'd hoped. We'd not only exposed the full scope of Patricia's manipulation, but we documented her willingness to endanger Amanda, file false reports, and coordinate with Derek in a conspiracy to destroy our family. The war wasn't over, but we'd won the most important battle by forcing Patricia to reveal her true nature in front of witnesses while being recorded. Whatever came next, we now had the evidence needed to protect our family from her manipulations. The CPS investigation that Patricia triggered with her false report became the catalyst that finally brought her entire conspiracy crashing down. Within hours of her phone call, we were contacted by a caseworker who'd been assigned to investigate allegations of domestic violence and child endangerment in our home. Sarah Martinez was a seasoned CPS investigator with 15 years of experience in family crisis situations, and she immediately recognized the signs of a manipulated report. Patricia's allegations were oddly specific about financial details, but vague about actual instances of abuse or endangerment. "I've seen this pattern before," Sarah told us during her initial home visit on Sunday evening. When grandparents or extended family members file reports that focus heavily on income rather than safety, it usually indicates ulterior motives. Sarah's professional assessment was that our home was stable and safe. Our marriage was obviously loving, despite recent stresses, and the allegations against Jake were unsupported by any evidence of actual domestic violence or child endangerment. However, Sarah continued, "I'm required to complete a full investigation, which means interviewing family members and documenting the situation that led to this report." The investigation process worked in our favor because it required Sarah to interview Patricia, Derek, and Amanda as part of documenting the family dynamics. When Sarah listened to Amanda's recording of Patricia's confession about the fertility drugs and Derek's accidental text message about closing the deal, her professional opinion shifted dramatically. "This isn't a child welfare case," Sarah told us after completing her interviews. "This is a case of attempted legal manipulation using false reports to create official documentation. I'm required to report this to law enforcement." By Tuesday morning, Patricia was facing charges of filing a false report to CPS, a felony in Georgia that carried potential jail time and mandatory counseling. Derek was charged as a co-conspirator based on the text message evidence and his financial support of Patricia's legal strategy. But the legal consequences went far beyond criminal charges. Marcus had shared our evidence with his attorney contacts, and Patricia's real estate business was now under investigation by the state licensing board. Her systematic abuse of professional relationships to gather private information about our family had violated multiple ethical standards. She used her real estate connections to access your insurance information, employment records, even utility bills, Margaret Chen explained during our emergency meeting Wednesday morning. "That's criminal invasion of privacy combined with abuse of professional trust." The scope of Patricia's privacy violations was staggering. She'd convinced former clients who worked at various companies to provide confidential information about Jake and me, creating a network of unwitting accomplices in her surveillance campaign. Derek's situation was equally devastating. His pharmaceutical company had launched an internal investigation when they learned about his involvement in harassment and privacy invasion. Using company resources to fund personal vendettas was a fireable offense that could destroy his career permanently. Derek's employer is very concerned about the liability issues, Margaret continued. If it comes out that one of their sales representatives was using company funds and connections to stalk and harass people, it could expose them to massive lawsuits. The professional consequences were swift and severe. Derek was suspended pending investigation, his company car was repossessed, and his professional reputation in the pharmaceutical industry was effectively destroyed. Within a week, the successful man who'd seemed so superior to Jake was facing unemployment and potential criminal charges. But the most satisfying consequence was watching Patricia's carefully constructed social facade crumble as word spread through our small town about her arrest and the CPS investigation. The same community connection she'd used to gather information about us became the source of gossip about her manipulation and abuse. Amanda's wedding planning had to be postponed while she dealt with the emotional trauma of learning about her mother's true nature. But the crisis ultimately brought her and Marcus closer together as they worked through the family chaos as a team. I keep thinking about all the times Mom criticized your choices, Amanda told me during one of our daily phone calls, how she made me feel superior for following her timeline and her expectations. I was part of the golden child system without even realizing it. Amanda's recognition of Patricia's manipulation tactics was crucial for her own healing, but it also provided additional evidence of the systematic nature of Patricia's abuse. The pattern of favoring one daughter while undermining the other was textbook narcissistic parenting that would be relevant in any custody proceedings. The financial investigation revealed that Patricia had borrowed against properties that weren't fully owned by her, essentially committing fraud to fund her legal campaign against us. Her real estate empire, built over decades, was collapsing as creditors discovered her unauthorized borrowing and clients learned about her ethical violations. She mortgaged properties that belonged to her business partnership without her partner's knowledge, Margaret explained. That's commercial fraud in addition to everything else. Her business partner is filing civil suits to recover the embezzled funds. Patricia's financial ruin was complete and swift. The woman who'd criticized Jake's teaching salary as inadequate was now facing bankruptcy, unemployment, and potential imprisonment. The irony was perfect and devastating. But perhaps the most important consequence was the healing that began in Jake's relationship with his own sense of worth. Carol worked with him to understand how Patricia's manipulation had exploited his natural humility and desire to provide for his family. She identified your core values and weaponized them against you, Carol explained during one of their therapy sessions. Your love for Bernardine became proof that you should leave her. Your desire to provide for your family became evidence that you were failing as a husband. Understanding the psychological mechanics of Patricia's manipulation helped Jake recognize that his doubts hadn't been based on reality, but on expertly crafted emotional manipulation. His teaching career, our home, our financial situation, none of it had actually been inadequate until Patricia convinced him to see it through her distorted lens. The CPS investigation concluded with Sarah filing a report that cleared us of all allegations while documenting Patricia's pattern of false reporting and family manipulation. The official conclusion was that our home was stable, our marriage was strong, and our preparation for parenthood was appropriate and loving. I'm also recommending that Patricia Williams be added to our database of individuals who file malicious reports, Sarah told us, Any future complaints she makes about family members will be flagged for additional scrutiny. By the end of the week, Patricia's campaign against our family had not only failed completely, but had resulted in her own destruction. She was facing criminal charges, financial ruin, professional disgrace, and complete social isolation. Derek was unemployed and facing his own legal battles. Meanwhile, Jake had moved back home permanently. We were preparing for our baby's arrival with renewed excitement, and Amanda was planning a much smaller, more intimate wedding that focused on her relationship with Marcus rather than social expectations. "I can't believe how completely everything turned around," Jake said one evening as we sat on our couch, finally able to relax for the first time in months. "Patricia created her own downfall," I replied. "She was so obsessed with controlling everyone else's lives that she made increasingly desperate and illegal choices. Eventually, she crossed so many lines that even she couldn't cover her tracks." The justice felt complete and satisfying, but more importantly, our family was stronger than ever. Patricia's attempts to destroy our marriage had instead forced us to fight for each other and our future together. We'd learned to recognize manipulation tactics, to communicate more effectively under pressure, and to trust our own judgment over external criticism. As I felt our baby moving inside me, I realized that Patricia's greatest failure wasn't just legal or financial, it was missing the chance to be part of our child's life. Her obsession with control had cost her the grandmother role she'd claimed to want so desperately. 6 months later, our daughter Emma was born on a crisp April morning surrounded by love and joy, rather than the legal battles Patricia had planned. Jake held her for the first time with tears streaming down his face, all the doubts about his worthiness as a father completely erased by the overwhelming reality of being needed and loved by this tiny person. The delivery room was filled with people who actually supported us. Jake's parents had driven up from Florida, Amanda and Marcus were there with flowers and excited smiles, and Carol had made the trip from Athens to meet her new niece. The contrast with Patricia's vengeful manipulation couldn't have been starker. Patricia herself was notably absent, serving a 6-month sentence in minimum security prison after pleading guilty to charges of filing false reports, fraud, and harassment. Her legal team had negotiated the plea deal in exchange for admitting her actions and agreeing to mandatory counseling for narcissistic personality disorder. The counseling requirement was actually the most important part of the sentence, Margaret Chen had explained when the plea was finalized. It creates official documentation that Patricia suffers from a personality disorder that makes her dangerous to family members, which would be crucial if she ever tried to file for grandparents' rights in the future. Derek had avoided jail time but lost everything else that mattered to him professionally and financially. His pharmaceutical career was over, his reputation in the industry destroyed by the criminal charges and civil lawsuit we'd filed for harassment and invasion of privacy. He'd moved back to his parents' house in North Carolina, essentially starting over at 42 with nothing to show for his previous success. The civil lawsuit had been settled out of court with Derek's insurance company paying damages for the emotional distress and privacy violations. We'd use that settlement money to establish a college fund for Emma, finding perfect justice in the fact that Derek's harassment campaign would ultimately fund our daughter's education. Amanda's wedding had been postponed until after Emma's birth, allowing her to process the trauma of Patricia's manipulation and plan a celebration that reflected her own values rather than her mother's expectations. The smaller, more intimate ceremony was exactly what she and Marcus had actually wanted, free from Patricia's pressure for social status and expensive displays. I realized that almost everything about my original wedding plans was really Mom's vision, not mine. Amanda told me while helping me feed Emma during one of her visits. The expensive venue, the huge guest list, the elaborate decorations, I was going along with it, because I thought that's what successful people did. Amanda's recovery from Patricia's manipulation had been remarkable to watch. She'd started therapy with Carol to understand how the golden child dynamic had affected her own sense of identity and worth. The process was painful, but ultimately liberating as she learned to distinguish between her authentic preferences and Patricia's imposed expectations. The fertility drugs were just the most extreme example, Amanda continued. Mom had been controlling my reproductive choices for months, making me believe that my value depended on getting pregnant quickly and providing grandchildren on her timeline. The fertility drug incident had required extensive medical monitoring to ensure Amanda hadn't suffered any lasting damage from Patricia's unsupervised medication regimen. Fortunately, the dosages had been conservative enough to avoid serious complications, but the potential for harm had been very real. Marcus had been incredible throughout Amanda's healing process, supporting her therapy and helping her establish boundaries with toxic family dynamics. Their relationship had actually grown stronger through the crisis as they learned to function as a team against external pressures. Jake's transformation had been equally remarkable. The confident, secure man I'd married was back, but now with additional wisdom about recognizing and resisting manipulation tactics. He'd returned to teaching with renewed passion, no longer questioning whether his profession was worthwhile or adequately compensated. I realized that Patricia's criticism of my career was never really about money. Jake reflected one evening as we watched Emma sleep in her crib. It was about control. She needed me to feel inadequate so I'd be vulnerable to her suggestions about what was best for our family. Jake had also started leading a support group for fathers who'd experienced family manipulation, using his experience with Patricia's tactics to help other men recognize and resist similar psychological attacks. The group met monthly at our church and had grown from 3 members to over 15 in just a few months. There are a lot of men out there who've been told they're not good enough providers or fathers, Jake explained. Patricia's tactics aren't unique. They're just more extreme than most family manipulation. The support group had connected us with other families who dealt with narcissistic manipulation, creating a network of people who understood the specific challenges of recovering from psychological abuse within family relationships. Emma's presence had brought healing to our family in ways we hadn't expected. Amanda and Marcus visited weekly, clearly excited about their role as aunt and uncle. Jake's parents had extended their stay after Emma's birth, making up for all the family support Patricia's manipulation had stolen from us. She's got Jake's eyes, but Bernardine's stubborn chin, Jake's mother observed with delight during one of Emma's fussy moments. This little girl is going to be a force to be reckoned with. The prediction felt right. Emma had been born into a family that had learned to fight for each other to resist manipulation and to prioritize authentic love over social expectations. She would grow up understanding that family meant support and protection, not control and manipulation. The financial impact of Patricia's destruction had actually improved our situation significantly. Jake had received a promotion to lead teacher at his school, partly because the crisis had demonstrated his ability to handle pressure and make principled decisions under stress. The salary increase wasn't enormous, but combined with my nursing income and the settlement from Derek, we were more financially secure than we'd ever been. More importantly, we'd learned that financial security meant having enough to meet our needs and save for the future, not competing with people like Derek and Marcus who measured worth through expensive possessions and social status. Emma won't grow up thinking that love depends on performance or that her value is determined by her achievements, I said to Jake as we planned her nursery. She'll know she's loved for who she is, not what she can do for other people's images. The contrast with how Amanda and I had been raised couldn't have been greater. Emma would grow up in a home where both parents' careers were respected, where financial decisions were made together, and where family members supported each other's authentic choices rather than trying to control them. Amanda's revelation during one of our sister talks had provided the final piece of understanding about Patricia's psychological makeup. I think Mom saw us as extensions of herself rather than separate people. Our achievements were her achievements. Our choices reflected on her success as a mother. Our children would be her legacy to control. That insight explained why Patricia had been so threatened by my pregnancy timing and so willing to drug Amanda to force conception. In her mind, our reproductive choices were really her reproductive choices, and our children would be her children to shape according to her vision. The most healing aspect of our recovery had been learning to trust our own judgment again. Patricia's manipulation had been so sophisticated that it had made us question our own perceptions of reality, our own values, and our own choices. Rebuilding that trust had required time and therapy, but it had ultimately made us stronger than we'd been before the crisis. As Emma grew from a newborn into an alert, engaged baby, I could see that she was going to inherit the best qualities of both her parents: Jake's patience and kindness, my determination and protective instincts, but most importantly, she would grow up free from the toxic dynamics that had shaped my own childhood. Amanda's wedding, when it finally happened in the fall, was everything her original ceremony would not have been: small, intimate, focused on love rather than status, and completely free from Patricia's controlling influence. Emma served as flower girl at 6 months old, carried down the aisle by Jake while wearing a simple white dress that Amanda had sewn herself. The ceremony was held in Marcus's family church with only immediate family and close friends present. The reception was catered by a local restaurant rather than an expensive catering company from Atlanta. The flowers were from Amanda's own garden rather than an elaborate florist arrangement. "This feels like us," Amanda said during her wedding dance with Marcus. "The original wedding felt like performing someone else's idea of what our life should look like." Patricia's absence from Amanda's wedding was felt but not mourned. Her own choices had excluded her from this important family milestone, just as they had excluded her from Emma's birth and would exclude her from all future celebrations until she completed her court-ordered therapy and demonstrated genuine change. "Sometimes I feel sad about Mom missing these moments," Amanda admitted during the reception. "But then I remember how she would have tried to control everything and make it about her, and I realize we're better off without that energy." The wedding was a celebration of authentic love and family support, everything Patricia's manipulation had tried to prevent. As I watched Amanda and Marcus exchange vows they'd written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams and protect each other from toxic influences, I felt proud of how far our family had come. Emma slept peacefully in my arms throughout the ceremony, surrounded by people who loved her for who she was, rather than what she might become. She was growing up in a family that had learned to choose love over control, authenticity over appearance, and mutual support over competition. The healing wasn't complete recovery. From narcissistic abuse takes years, not months. But we'd created a foundation of trust and communication that would allow us to continue growing stronger together. Patricia's attempt to destroy our family had ultimately taught us how to build something better than we'd ever had before. 1 year after Emma's birth, I stood in the kitchen of our expanded home watching my daughter take her first tentative steps toward Jake's outstretched arms. The scene was so perfectly normal, so beautifully ordinary that it took my breath away. This was the life Patricia had tried to prevent us from having, and seeing it flourish felt like the sweetest possible victory. Patricia had been released from prison 6 months earlier and had completed her court-ordered counseling program, though the psychiatrist's report suggested her narcissistic personality disorder was deeply ingrained and likely to resurface under stress. She'd attempted to contact Amanda and me several times through intermediaries, claiming she wanted to meet her granddaughter and rebuild family relationships. She sent another letter, Amanda told me during one of our weekly phone calls, through her lawyer this time. She says she's learned from her mistakes and wants to be part of Emma's life. We developed a clear protocol for handling Patricia's attempted contact based on advice from Carol and Margaret Chen. Any communication had to go through our attorneys. Any meeting requests had to include supervised visitation with a court-appointed mediator, and any relationship rebuilding had to begin with Patricia taking full responsibility for her actions without making excuses. Has she met any of those conditions? I asked, though I already knew the answer. No, the letter is full of justifications about how she was only trying to help us make better choices. She talks about her mistakes, but doesn't actually admit to specific harmful actions. It's like she learned therapy language without understanding the concepts behind it. Patricia's inability to take genuine responsibility wasn't surprising. Narcissistic personality disorder made it nearly impossible for her to admit fault without simultaneously justifying her actions or blaming external circumstances. Until she could acknowledge the full scope of harm she'd caused without qualification, she remained dangerous to our family's well-being. Derek had faded from our lives entirely after his financial settlement and career destruction. We'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to North Carolina and was working in medical device sales, a significant step down from his previous pharmaceutical position. His romantic pursuit of me had apparently been motivated more by ego than genuine love, because he'd made no attempts to contact me after facing consequences for his actions. Some people are only attracted to what they can't have, Carol had observed during one of our family therapy sessions. Derek was probably more interested in winning a competition than building a relationship. The insight had helped Jake process his own recovery from Derek's manipulation campaign. Understanding that Derek's apparent advantages, wealth, status, social connections had been weapons rather than genuine offerings of love made it easier to see the attacks on Jake's worth as calculated rather than accurate. Jake had thrived in his teaching career over the past year, earning recognition from the school district for his innovative reading program and his leadership in faculty development. The confidence Patricia had tried to destroy was stronger than ever, built on genuine achievement rather than external validation. I realized that Patricia's criticism was never about whether I was a good teacher or provider, Jake reflected as we watched Emma play with blocks on our living room floor. It was about making me doubt myself so I'd be vulnerable to her control. Once I understood that her opinions lost all their power. Jake's support group for fathers dealing with family manipulation had grown into a regional resource that helped dozens of men recognize and resist psychological abuse. His experience with Patricia's tactics had qualified him to help others in ways that felt meaningful and healing. Emma had grown into a happy, confident baby who was clearly adored by everyone in her life except the grandmother who'd never met her. She had Jake's patient temperament and my determined spirit, already showing signs of the strong personality that would protect her from the kind of manipulation Amanda and I had endured. She's going to grow up knowing that her value doesn't depend on other people's approval, I said to Jake as Emma successfully stacked 3 blocks before knocking them down with delighted giggles. The contrast with my own childhood was profound. Emma would never wonder which parent loved her more, never feel responsible for managing adult emotions, never have her achievements minimized or her choices questioned based on someone else's timeline or expectations. Amanda's marriage to Marcus had blossomed in the absence of Patricia's interference. They'd bought a house near us and were planning to start their own family naturally, without pressure or artificial timelines. Amanda had discovered a talent for photography and was building a small business, taking family portraits and wedding photos. "I love capturing genuine moments," Amanda explained during one of her visits, showing me photos from a recent wedding shoot. After years of performing for mom's expectations, there's something healing about helping other people document their authentic emotions. Amanda's photography work was more than a creative outlet. It was therapy through art, helping her process her own experience with performed versus genuine family dynamics while helping other families celebrate their real relationships. The financial consequences of Patricia's campaign had ultimately benefited our entire family in unexpected ways. The lawsuit settlement had funded Emma's college account home improvements that gave us space for our growing family and investments that would provide long-term security. Patricia's attempt to prove we were financially unstable had ironically improved our financial position significantly. More importantly, the crisis had taught us to distinguish between wants and needs, between genuine security and status symbols. We lived comfortably, but modestly, focusing our resources on experiences and relationships, rather than possessions designed to impress others. The legal ramifications of Patricia's actions continued to unfold. Her real estate license had been permanently revoked. Her business partnership had been dissolved through bankruptcy proceedings, and she faced ongoing civil suits from former clients whose privacy she'd violated. The professional empire she'd built over decades was completely destroyed with no realistic possibility of recovery. She'll probably end up working as a sales clerk or administrative assistant, Margaret Chen had predicted during our final legal consultation, the kind of job she used to look down on when criticizing other people's career choices. The poetic justice was satisfying, but more importantly, Patricia's professional destruction meant she no longer had access to the network of contacts she'd used to gather private information about our family. Her ability to manipulate and spy had been permanently crippled. The most significant healing had come through our expanded understanding of healthy family relationships. Jake's parents had become regular visitors who supported our choices without trying to control them. Carol had become a true sister-in-law who provided guidance without judgment. Amanda and Marcus had become partners in building a new kind of family culture based on mutual respect rather than competition. "This is what family is supposed to feel like," Amanda observed during one of our holiday celebrations. "People who celebrate your successes without feeling threatened, who support your choices even when they're different from their own, who love you for who you are rather than what you can do for them." Emma's first birthday party was a perfect example of our new family dynamics. We celebrated in our backyard with homemade decorations, a simple cake I'd baked myself, and guests who were there to honor Emma rather than to be seen at an impressive event. The contrast with the elaborate parties Patricia had thrown for Amanda's childhood milestones couldn't have been greater. She won't remember this party," Jake said as Emma smeared frosting across her high chair tray with obvious delight. "But she'll grow up in a family where celebrations are about joy rather than performance." The prediction felt exactly right. Emma would have birthday parties where her happiness was the only goal, Christmas mornings where gifts were given from love rather than obligation, and family dinners where conversation flowed naturally rather than being orchestrated for specific effects. As Emma's first year ended and her second began, I found myself reflecting on how completely our lives had changed since Patricia's manipulation campaign. What had started as an attempt to destroy our family had ultimately made us stronger, wiser, and more connected than we'd ever been before. The pregnancy that Patricia had seen as a problem to be managed had become the source of our greatest joy. The marriage she'd tried to destroy had emerged more trusting and communicative than ever. The financial limitations she'd criticized had motivated us to build genuine security rather than impressive facades. Most importantly, we'd learned to recognize manipulation tactics that would help us protect Emma and any future children from psychological abuse. We could teach our daughter about healthy relationships because we'd learned to create them ourselves. We could model authentic communication because we'd been forced to develop those skills under pressure. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd just told Patricia no from the beginning. I admitted to Jake one evening as we tucked Emma into her crib. We weren't strong enough then, Jake replied thoughtfully. We needed to go through this crisis to understand how manipulation works and develop the skills to resist it. Now we're equipped to protect our family in ways we weren't before. The insight felt profound and healing. Patricia's campaign against us had been meant to demonstrate our inadequacy as parents and partners, but it had actually proven our strength and commitment to each other. We'd faced coordinated psychological warfare and emerged victorious through love communication and mutual support. Emma drifted off to sleep as we stood together, watching her breathe peacefully, completely secure in her parents' love and protection. She was growing up in a family that had been tested by fire and proven unbreakable, surrounded by people who would never try to control her choices or manipulate her emotions. As we turned off her bedroom light and walked hand in hand toward our own room, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life we'd built together. Patricia had tried to convince us that love wasn't enough, that financial security and social status were more important than emotional connection and mutual respect. She'd been spectacularly wrong about everything that actually mattered. The most important life lesson Emma would inherit wasn't about money or status or meeting other people's expectations. It was about the power of authentic love to overcome any obstacle, the importance of choosing partners who respect your autonomy, and the strength that comes from building relationships on trust rather than control. Patricia had spent a lifetime trying to prove that manipulation was more powerful than love, that control was more important than connection, that appearance mattered more than authenticity. Her own destruction had proven exactly the opposite. Families built on genuine love and mutual respect were strong enough to withstand any external attack. As Jake and I settled into bed together, discussing our plans for Emma's upcoming walking milestones and our hopes for expanding our family in the future, I realized that Patricia's greatest failure wasn't legal or financial. Her greatest failure was missing the opportunity to be part of the beautiful life we'd built together. She'd chosen control over connection manipulation over love and performance over authenticity. Those choices had cost her everything she'd claimed to want: family relationships, social respect, financial security, and the chance to be a grandmother to Emma. We'd chosen differently, and our choices had created something Patricia could never destroy. A family built on unshakable love, tested by adversity, and committed to protecting each other from anyone who tried to come between us. That love had been enough after all. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting your own well-being? Sometimes the people who claim to love us most are the ones who try to control us most. And learning to recognize that pattern can change everything about how we build our own families. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that authentic love really is stronger than manipulation. Like this video if you believe in choosing genuine relationships over toxic family dynamics. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family manipulation, and comment below about your own experiences with setting boundaries with controlling family members. Thank you for listening to Emma's origin story and the battle that brought her family together. Remember that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is protecting them from people who see them as possessions, rather than people even when those people are supposed to love them unconditionally. Here's to choosing love over control, authenticity over performance, and building families that heal rather than harm. Sweet dreams, and may your own families be filled with the kind of unbreakable love that can weather any storm.